Chapter 453. Inside the hut, the mountain breeze was gentle and pleasant, just like the headmaster's mood. Eldest brother and second brother sat quietly by the table, one grinding ink and the other making tea. The headmaster waved his hand and said with a smile, "I'm happy today, so I won't write any more." Second brother opened his mouth slightly and was about to say something. But he was the first gentleman in the world and could not do such a thing in front of his beloved teacher. Finally, he closed his mouth and continued grinding ink with a serious expression. Eldest brother looked at Junmo's expression and could not help shaking his head with a smile. Then he looked at the teacher behind the table and asked softly, "Teacher, why are you happy?" The headmaster laughed and said, "It's a good deal to exchange the Howren sword without great spirit for Lu Bai's day sword." "Of course I'm happy." Eldest brother smiled and said, "I see." The headmaster stroked his beard and said, "That sword not only has the shape but also some of Lu Bai's charm. Your youngest brother is a superb calligrapher in the world and is best at copying. He also comprehended the art of separating words and memorizing them with the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong. He is indeed the best person in the academy to do this." The headmaster and eldest brother were happy, but second brother was not. Lu Bai was recognized as the most powerful man in the world and was called the Sword Sage. But in his heart, the powerful man from the South Jin Kingdom was just an enemy that he would defeat in his cultivation and battle life. He was just a stone step that he would step on in the future. The day sword style contained in the paper sword was not qualified to be compared to the Howren sword left behind by his youngest uncle, even if it was a Howren sword without the great spirit. Second brother had always been a straightforward person who disdained to hide his emotions. Whatever he was thinking, he would show it on his face. However, as a person who respected his teacher, he could not refute the headmaster's words. Thus, he remained silent and continued to grind the ink, moving faster and faster. The ink in the square inkstone accumulated more and more and gradually formed a lake. The ink block rotated at a high speed and rolled up a black whirlpool. But strangely, no ink spilled out. The headmaster looked at the ink in the inkstone and sighed. "It is said that dripping water can wear through a stone and grinding a pestle into a needle. But I have never heard of grinding ink through an inkstone." Second brother suddenly came to his senses and stopped what he was doing and sincerely apologized to the teacher. The headmaster looked at him and said, "Say what you want to say." Second senior brother frowned slightly and said, "Although Lu Bai's swordsmanship has some merits, it is not worthy of being on an equal footing with youngest uncle's Howren sword. Moreover, youngest brother's methods are not very honorable." The headmaster said, "Since it is good, we should take it generously." The headmaster frowned even more. He thought the headmaster of second brother's words and thought. He thought the headmaster's words and thought. Suddenly he realized that he had been so disrespectful to his teacher, and he couldn't help but feel regret. Suddenly he realized that he had been so disrespectful to the headmaster and felt and said he was master of the day sword, and said, "Lu of the uncle. Academy teacher of master, sword of the ocean of the Lu of teacher of sword, teacher of brother of the sword of master," said. "It is the same reason why the academy accepted the day sword. We are just preserving the wisdom of the previous generations and hope that it will sprout again." The headmaster and the eldest brother thought of the countless books in the cave at the back of the mountain. The second brother was shocked and hated himself for what he had done. He knelt on the futon and bowed to the headmaster. He said in a low voice, "I know I was wrong. I will go to all the cultivation sects in the world and ask them for their cultivation manuals." The expressions of the headmaster and eldest brother changed slightly, and they subconsciously wanted to find tea to drink. They thought that if they really asked those sects to hand over their cultivation manuals in the name of preserving human civilization, they would definitely think that they were crazy or robbers. Jun Mo, on the other hand, was a proud person who would do whatever he set his mind to, and would not give in even if he was in the right. If those sects refused to hand over their cultivation manuals, he would definitely not care about robbing them. Then the so-called asking would naturally become robbing, and there would probably be a bloody battle in the cultivation world. The headmaster looked at him and reprimanded him in a low voice. "If I could throw away my pride and not rob, I would have taken Lu Bai back to the academy and forced him to write it out when he comprehended the day sword. Why would I need your youngest brother to spend so much effort on this? I don't even know what you are thinking about." The eldest brother shook his head and said, "Of course it is voluntary." The second brother was confused by the headmaster's scolding. He said, "But youngest brother's behavior is almost stealing. It is not much different from robbing." The headmaster of the academy was embarrassed. The eldest brother poured the tea at a speed that was rarely seen. He said respectfully, "Teacher, please have some tea." The headmaster of the academy took the tea and took a sip. He looked at his favorite eldest disciple and praised, "You are worth teaching." The second brother frowned and thought hard. What could he not be taught? The wild geese that spent the summer at Xuanyang Lake in the Gushan Commandery returned to Chang'an. They circled around the old Buddhist pagoda for a few days. Their shadows covered the sky and they chirped in the mountains and Yanming Lake. Then they flapped their wings and flew south to the warmer Great Swamp. They would not come back until next spring. The door of the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street had not been opened for a long time. The wild cat was lying on the wall and basking in the cooling sunshine. It looked at the dusty patio indifferently and wondered how many days had passed since the guy who had hit it with firewood died and whether his body had been exposed in the wilderness. At the entrance of the alley, there was a barbecue stand. Boss Wu kept an old dog. Every morning in dusk, he would walk the dog to relieve his loneliness and stress from his wife. As the weather got colder and colder, he would walk the dog once a day instead of twice a day, and the time was now noon. The gambling house in the West City was still thriving. Mr. Chi wore a long silk gown and played an iron ball in his hand. He accepted the compliments of his neighbors with a reserved manner like a rich man and wondered when second brother Chow would come back. The Taoist who performed talisman arts in the Taoist temple on Vermilion Bird Street was sick. But the Taoist temple was renovated, so more believers came to the temple to pray devoutly than before. Regardless of the passage of time or the change of seasons, the Tangs in Chang'an lived a peaceful and happy life as before. The hearty laughter in the streets never stopped. A paper sword was added to the collection at the back of the mountain of the academy. It was sent from the South Jin Kingdom to the West Hill and finally came to the Tang Empire. The smell of fresh paint in the house by the Yanming Lake gradually dissipated. The young people in the house went further and further on the road of cultivation. Under the sharpening of talisman intent and sword chi, Sang Sang understood how to use the divine skill to fight. Yi Hongyu learned the Haoran sword and understood the thin paper sword more and more deeply. With a powerful person like the Tao addict as his goal, Ning Kei's progress was even more amazing. He became stronger and stronger. His current cultivation level had already stabilized at the upper level of the see-through realm, and he was resolutely walking upwards, getting closer and closer to the ravine that seemed to be the gap between heaven and man. One day, amidst the mist and heavy willows, he actually faintly saw that threshold. However, what made him feel slightly perplexed was that the threshold was somewhat frighteningly high for the current him. Spring passed, summer returned, and autumn returned. When autumn returned to Chang'an, General Xia Ho, who had been stationed at the border of the Tang Empire for decades and made great achievements, was about to return to Chang'an. There are some more. I'm writing. I'm still asking for recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 454. According to the laws of the Tang Empire, the soldiers who had gone out to war had to return to Chang'an through the East City Gate. Hence, the meritorious post, which was more than 10 miles away from the East City Gate, became a very important place. Since the founding of the Tang Empire 1,000 years ago, countless famous generals and warriors had passed through this place with glory and achievements. The stables in the post and the poplar trees along the straight official road had witnessed many historical scenes with their own eyes. Xia Ho looked at the majestic city in the west and remained silent. According to the rules of the imperial court, he and his subordinates had to spend the night in the Merit Inn. They would enter the city the next morning and then go directly to the palace to see His Majesty. Chang'an looked extremely majestic in the twilight. The black and cyan city walls reflected the light of the setting sun and glowed with a copper color. It looked indestructible and unusually magnificent. As one of the 4 most respected generals of the Tang Empire, Xia Ho, who had been in the army for many years, naturally had deep feelings for Chang'an. However, not many people knew that although he often returned to the capital to report on his work and the general's mansion was in the North City, he did not spend much time in Chang'an. For decades, he had spent most of his time leading tens of thousands of cavalry to guard the cold northern borderline. He helped the empire to open up new territory and intimidate the cavalry of the Yen Kingdom and the left King's palace. Now that he had finally left the cold northern borderline, tens of thousands of cavalry were all left near the northeast border military camp in Tuyang City. The imperial court had already appointed General Shu to take over, so there should be no problem. Only a few dozen soldiers followed him back. The imperial court had explicitly allowed him to bring more soldiers back to Chang'an. However, he was very cautious on the eve of his retirement and did not do anything that might arouse the suspicion of the civil officials. In order to reassure the imperial court, Xiaoho's 2 sons were still in Chang'an, imprisoned in the general's mansion. As for his legal wife, relatives and loyal old servants, they had already returned to their hometown a few months ago. They cleaned up the old fields, took out pickles from the old cellar, and dried them in preparation for his retirement. Of course, that was not Xiaoho's real hometown. His real hometown was in the cold region of the far north, which was the largest tribe of the Desolate Man. As the Desolate Man moved south, he could no longer return to his hometown. Perhaps it had been since the day he betrayed the Enlightenment doctrine. Gushi is dead. Linling is dead. Many people who followed me back then are dead. As the sun set, the sky became darker and darker. The purple bronze city wall of Chang'an was gradually painted with an ominous blood-red color. Xiaoho squinted at the wall and thought of his trusted subordinates who had left him over the years at the cost of their deaths. He could not help but feel a little sad. In spring, the news of Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu's death spread from Chang'an to the military camp. This news did not make him sad but made him a little vigilant. Sadness and vigilance were not emotions that an expert should have. Xiaoho had been forcefully suppressing these emotions, so he began to feel tired and coughed in the twilight. The Great Tang military was a place that worshipped the strong. An ordinary general would never be willing to cough in front of his subordinates and reveal his weak side. But Xiaoho did not care because he knew how powerful he was in the eyes of his subordinates, and he knew that he was still powerful. Defender General of the state Su Shi had been coughing for more than 10 years, but he was still the #1 person in the Great Tang military. No one could replace his prestige or his majesty's favor. Xiaoho coughed repeatedly. Perhaps he thought that after entering Chang'an tomorrow, he would be unarmored and free from the last bit of fear, so he coughed very happily and even seemed a little presumptuous. The guard captain standing at the gate of the courier station looked at the broad figure of the general in front of him and listened to the coughing. His face revealed a worried expression. In his eyes, the general was indeed still powerful, but he had seen with his own eyes several battles between the general and the powerhouse from the devil's doctrine in the wilderness, so he was very worried. At this moment, the ground outside the wall of the courier station suddenly trembled a little. Neither the respectful low-ranking officials in the courier station nor Xiaoho's guard noticed this slight tremble. Although Xiaoho was a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts and one of the most powerful and terrifying men in the world, he was not a real god, so his cough could not make the ground tremble. He quietly looked at Chang'an City under the sunset, then turned around and walked into the courier station. Someone was waiting for him in the room of the courier station. It was an extremely tall and burly man, even taller than Xiaoho by half a head. His expression was solemn and his figure was straight, like an indestructible mountain. This man wore a cloth robe, and under the thin material traces of armor could be seen faintly. There was also a solemn aura of talisman inscriptions seeping out from the cloth. When Xiaoho stood in front of this mountain-like man, he was obviously shorter than the other party, but he felt more burly and stronger than the other party, so he did not need to raise his head. If people see Luo Kadi, the commander of the West Hill Divine Palace Divine Guards, suddenly appearing in the courier station closest to Chang'an City, they will definitely think that this is a provocation to the Tang Empire. He coldly looked at the man and said, "I know that you are a proud man, but do you really think that there are no powerhouses in the imperial center of the Tang Empire? In Chang'an City behind us, there are at least 10 people who can easily kill you. Appearing in front of me at this time is completely courting death." Luo Kadi said, "Since I dared to come, naturally I am not afraid of death. In my opinion, General Xiaoho, returning to Chang'an City is more like seeking death. Can you still come out alive?" Xiaoho's expression did not change, and he indifferently said, "In small countries like the South Jin, Song and Yu, your status in the Divine Hall can give you unlimited respect. But here in Chang'an City, in my eyes, you are just a dog raised by the hierarch. What right do you have to speak to me in such a tone?" A trace of anger flashed in the depths of Luo Kadi's eyes, but he forcibly suppressed it and said with a cold smile, "I admit that I am a dog raised by the hierarch lord, and you are a lion raised by Haotian. Now that you have lost your spirit, you still want to return to Chang'an City. Do you really want to make your enemy happy?" Xiaoho said in a low voice, "This is an agreement between me and the academy. Looking at the world, who dares to obstruct it? Even that master of yours does not have this ability. The Divine Hall is very happy to see General Xiaoho enjoy a happy old age, but are you really willing to do so?" Luo Kadi took out a letter with a rune fire seal and handed it over. He said, "This is a letter written by the hierarch lord himself. He invites you to West Hill. No, back to West Hill." Xiaoho took the letter and his expression still did not change. Luo Kadi said, "The Divine Hall really needs your power. Furthermore, the Hierarch Lord has said that retiring does not mean that you have to live in the countryside forever. There will be a time when you will return." Xiahou looked at him and his two iron-like eyebrows slightly raised. He said, "What can you give me?" Luo Kadi said, "Since you are loyal to the Empress, then the Westhill Divine Palace promises that in the future, in the fight for the throne of the Tang Empire, the Divine Hall will do its best to help the Empress's prince succeed." With the terrifying power of the Westhill Divine Palace, it was a very sincere invitation for Xiahou to throw out such a heavy bet a long time in advance. However, to Luo Kadi's surprise, in the face of the Hierarch Lord's sincerity, Xiahou did not show the expected emotional reaction. Instead, he said directly, "I won't see you out." Luo Kadi suppressed his anger and said, "The Divine Hall needs an answer." Xiahou said, "I am very grateful and I will seriously consider it. That is my answer." The ground of the Merit Post House trembled slightly again. Luo Kadi left quietly. The officials and people in Chang'an who were preparing for the welcoming ceremony would probably never know that the Westhill Divine Palace's Divine Guard commander had once come to Chang'an and tried to lead General Xiahou to another path. Looking at the letter written by the Westhill hierarch, Xiahou's face revealed a mocking smile. He knew that this was indeed a letter written by the Hierarch Lord. Over the years, he had received 7 letters written by the Hierarch Lord, and was very familiar with the handwriting on the cover. He was mocking the intention of the Westhill Divine Palace, to help the Empress's own prince ascend to the throne of the Tang Empire? If the Westhill Divine Palace knew that the Empress was his most beloved sister, Xia Tian, and that the prince had half the blood of the desolate flowing in him and the aura of the Enlightenment doctrine, would the bigwigs in the Divine Hall still dare to do this? The mocking smile on Xiahou's face slowly turned into a self-deprecating one. His fingers slightly tightened, ready to crush the letter written by the Hierarch Lord into powder. However, for some reason he hesitated for a moment before stopping. General Xiahou, who had been stationed in the northern borderline for the Tang Empire for decades, did not raise any conditions and was willing to retire. The officials in the imperial court felt a little strange, but immediately felt much more relaxed. After asking for His Majesty's orders, the imperial court gave the general the highest treatment and honor. In the early morning, under the warm guidance of the officials from the Ministry of Rites and the respectful gazes of the Yulin Royal Guards, Xiahou put on a new set of armor and rode towards Chang'an with dozens of bodyguards. The official rode in front of the east gate of Chang'an and had long been washed clean. In the solemn music, Prince Li Peiyan of the Tang Empire led the civil and military officials out of the city to wait. Countless celebrities in the city were also waiting eagerly. The imperial court had already drafted the edict and was waiting for Xiahou to enter the palace to have an audience with him. At this time, the edict was quietly placed in the palace, with dazzling rewards and titles of nobility. Looking at the dense welcoming crowd from afar, Xiahou disregarded the advice of the officials from the Ministry of Rites and dismounted in advance. He pulled Ma Jiang and walked in that direction. Seeing this scene, the prince smiled and shook his head. He waved away the eunuch beside him who was trying to dissuade him and walked towards him at the same time. The two met in front of the departure pavilion outside the east gate. Xiahou calmly saluted to the prince. Li Peiyan found it difficult to calm down. Looking at his dark face, he sighed and said, "It's good that you're back." The officials of the Tang Empire did not like General Xiahou, who was famous for his arrogance and violence. For decades, there had been rumors that Xiahou had killed prisoners of war and innocent people to pass off his military exploits. No one knew how many laws of the Tang Empire had been violated. However, there had been no evidence. Moreover, everyone knew that this general was highly regarded by the Empress, which meant that he was also highly regarded by the Emperor. Perhaps for this reason the people of Chang'an did not sincerely love General Xiahou like they did the other 3 generals of the empire. Although Xiahou did not kill the Tangs indiscriminately, the simple and direct people of Chang'an always felt that violence was not a real ability. After all, Xiahou had guarded the bitter northern frontier for decades for the empire. Today he had retired, but he was still warmly welcomed by the people of Chang'an. The crowds on both sides of the street cheered and applauded from time to time. There was a tea house on the side of the street. The shopkeeper and waiters of the tea house all ran to the street to welcome the return of the general. No one cared about the business at all. Fortunately, there were not many customers in the tea house at this time. Ning Kei and Sang Sang sat at the table by the window. He listened to the cheers and applause from the street and looked at the back of Xiahou, who had just ridden past the tea house. After a moment of silence he said, "Compared to when he was in Tiang City, He really has aged a lot. If I finish it today, I will finish it for this month. I suddenly feel relaxed just like Xiaoho today. There won't be many updates tomorrow because my father-in-law and mother-in-law have come back from Yinchuan for a vacation. I will go back to my parents' home with the leaders. Please continue to cast your monthly votes and recommendation votes to support me. At midnight, I will send a special chapter to ask for monthly votes. Friends who have updates to remind you, please forgive me if it disturbs your sleep. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to cast your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 455. Ning Ke had met Xiaoho for the first time by the Hulun Sea last year. Later they had a close encounter in Tiang City. At that time, although Xiaoho had failed in the fight for the Ming Hand Scroll of the Tomes of Arcane and was forced to reach an agreement with the Academy to retire, he was still calm and confident, and even had a hidden aggressiveness. However, Xiaoho had obviously aged a little today. Although he was wearing a brand new armor, his eyes were still cold and indifferent, and his body was still tall and straight like a mountain. Ning Ke could faintly smell the musty odor of a damp woodshed for many years coming from this general. Although the news that Xiaoho had been repeatedly assassinated by the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine in the wilderness was strictly kept secret by the Tang military ministry, it still gradually spread and naturally reached Ning Ke's ears. The Devil's Doctrine's method of eliminating traitors is more direct and powerful than I thought. Ning Ke looked at the back of Xiaoho, who was covered by the crowd in the distance. He thought that if Xiaoho's armor was really destroyed by the giant knife in Tang's hands, his originally extremely pitiful hope of success might be a little luckier. Xiaoho was an imperial general with a glorious title. He was not someone like Censor Zhang Yiqi or Huang Xing, who could be easily assassinated. The most critical problem was that Xiaoho was still so powerful even though he was getting older. It was basically impossible for Ning Ke to assassinate him without leaving any evidence. The imperial court and the academy tacitly allowed Xiaoho to retire peacefully. No one knew what the West Hill was thinking. In short, Ning Ke seemed to have countless backers, but in front of Xiaoho, these backers would not help at all. So under such circumstances, how could he kill Xiaoho? In the 15th year of the Tang Tianqi era, a plan gradually formed in Ning Ke's mind. However, every time he thought of this plan, even he himself felt that it was a little ridiculous because no matter how he looked at it, there was no possibility of success. If others, such as Li Yu, Yi Hongyu or Qin Pipi, knew the true content of his plan, they would think that there must be something wrong with his brain. In the whole world, probably only second brother and Chao Xiaoshu would agree. Sang Sang held her chin and looked at the crowd below the tea house. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Ning Ke with a worried expression. She said, "Why are you so anxious?" Ning Ke said, "I've been waiting for 15 years. I think I'm very patient." Sang Sang said seriously, "Let's wait until he's older and we're stronger. Let's wait for him to retire in the countryside for a few years. Won't we be more confident then?" Since she was a child, Ning Ke did not want her to think about those bloody and cruel things, but it did not mean that he did not teach her. In fact, whether in Min Mountain or on the grassland outside the city of Wei, he had been instilling a certain concept in the little handmaiden. No matter the enemy was old, weak, women or children, as long as she could defeat the enemy, no matter how shameless it was, no matter how sad it was. She had to endure it until the most confident moment before she took action. Once she took action, she had to kill the enemy. Ning Ke smiled and said, "If we don't kill them now, Xiaoho will really be old?" Sang Sang asked in confusion, "Isn't that good?" Ning Ke said, "When he's older, I'm more confident to kill him. But I'm worried that what if he dies of illness? What if he really dies of old age?" Sang Sang did not understand, thinking that if Xiaoho died of old age and illness, what was the problem? She asked, "Isn't that good?" Ning Ke nodded and said, "Very bad." Sang Sang frowned slightly and asked, "Why?" "Because Xiaoho is not my enemy." After a short pause, Ning Ke continued calmly, "He is my enemy." At this moment, the shopkeeper and waiters of the tea house returned to the tea house, excitedly talking about the troops they had seen on the street and admiring the power of General Xiaoho. Ning Ke quietly listened to the discussion in the tea house and shook his head. The enemy can die from natural disasters and man-made disasters, tsunamis and rivers. As long as he no longer stands in our way, blocks our way and destroys our business, it doesn't matter even if he chokes to death while eating or stinks to death while going to the toilet. But the enemy is different. When it comes to things like revenge, if it is dragged on for too long, it will gradually ferment and evolve into something else. Compared to killing the other party and making them pay for what happened in the past, The more important thing is to kill the other party so that they can forget what happened in the past and obtain true freedom. He looked at Sang Sang and said, but whether it is to let the enemy pay the price or to get relief, the most important thing is to kill the enemy. And he must die in the hands of the enemy. He can't die by himself, he can't be killed by God, and he can't die in bed. Ning Ke thought of that rainy year in the eastern city of Chang'an, the old blacksmith in the blacksmith shop who died with his eyes open, and his white hair wet by the rain. He looked slightly lost. He can't even be old, sick, or haggard. It is best to be at the peak of his life. Only in this way can he bring enough pleasure to the enemy. And this is the key to revenge. Xiaoho is already old. Ning Ke solemnly repeated what he had said before. If he is not killed, he will really be old. General Xiaoho returned to Chang'an and first entered the palace to see His Majesty. Then he received the title of nobility from His Majesty in the court meeting and the respect of the courtiers. After the meeting, he declined the invitations of several courtiers and went to the military ministry with his bodyguards to handle military affairs. He stayed in the small building in the meadow beside the Vermilion Bird Avenue for the whole afternoon. It was said that he had a long talk with General Su Shi, the military leader of the Tang Empire. The twilight gradually faded and the night shrouded Chang'an. Xiaoho left the military ministry. His bodyguards rode on horses with torches and escorted him to the solemn and luxurious prince's mansion in the northern city. The prince's mansion was brightly lit in the night. After an ordinary but old family banquet, Prince Li Peiyan of the Tang Empire took him to the study. On the black desk there were a few scrolls. The handwriting on the scrolls varied, and it was obvious that they were not written at the same time. There were some names written on the scrolls, and beside the names, there were detailed notes written in small block letters. Zhang Yiqi, Chen Zixin, Yan Suqing, Lin Ling, Gu Shi, Huang Xing, Yu Shuizhu. These names were either noble or humble, officials, civilians or soldiers. But they all had two characteristics in common. First, these people used to be members of the Tang Empire's military. Second, these people were all dead. Li Peiyan looked at the names on the files. After a long silence he said indifferently, these people are all dead, so it means that some people who should have died are still alive. Xiaoho looked at a name on the file and said expressionlessly, this person did not participate in it. He participated in the incident in the Yan territory. Li Peiyan sighed and pushed the files on the desk aside. He looked at Xiaoho and said worriedly, although there is no evidence, these names and the stories behind them can prove that our worries are right. There are indeed people in the Xianwei general's mansion who are still alive. Hearing the name Lin Guangyuan, Xiaoho's two thin eyebrows slowly frowned. Of course he remembered who Lin Guangyuan was. More than a decade ago, there was a Xianwei general in the Tang Empire's military who was famous for his bravery. That general's name was Lin Guangyuan. At that time, many people thought that Lin Guangyuan was another brave general of the Tang Empire after Xiaoho. In the first year of the Tang Empire's Tianqi era, Xiaoho killed Lin Guangyuan's whole family. It was not because he did not like to be compared with this general. Although he was known for being overbearing and violent, he did not have the interest and hobby of killing people's whole families. Xiaoho narrowed his eyes slightly and his expression was a little complicated. It was not because he felt guilty for the Xianwei general. He had killed too many people in his life and had done more cruel and cold-blooded things. It was nothing to kill a general's whole family. However, when the Prince Palace mentioned the name Lin Guangyuan, it reminded him of many things in the past. More than a decade ago, the Empress passed away due to illness. The families in Qinghe County were eager to take action. His Majesty took the concubine named Xia Tian to travel south to the Great Swamp and watch over the disaster. Xiaoho received the secret edict from His Majesty and secretly returned to Chang and from Tuyang City with thousands of cavalrymen to guard the rear for His Majesty and assist the prince to temporarily oversee the court affairs. He also received a secret edict from the West Hill Divine Palace. In the face of the secret edict from the West Hill Divine Palace, he was at the peak of his life and wanted to continue to enjoy the respect of the people. Therefore he calmly accepted the other party's request. There was a bloody storm in Chang and the whole Xianwei general's mansion was killed. Xiaoho knew that by doing this he would anger the emperor who was touring the Great Marsh. However, he believed that with his achievements, no matter how angry the emperor was, it was impossible for him to act against him without evidence. Moreover, he faintly hoped that in his anger, the emperor would not confer the title of empress to that concubine called Xia. He did not want his sister to become the empress of the Tang Empire because he knew that it was a very dangerous thing. However, he did not expect that His Majesty still let his sister become the empress. Compared to these stories, How much blood and dust had stained the stone lions in front of the Xianwei general's mansion had never moved Xiahou, let alone made him sad. In the study of the prince's mansion, Li Peiyin looked at Xiahou and said bitterly, "It is not a big deal that Lin Guangyuan still has descendants in the world. But if the son of the general who is determined to avenge him has become the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy and Mr. 13 of the second floor of the academy, it will be troublesome." Xiahou was silent for a moment and said, "Your Highness, you mean? Ning Ke is Lin Guangyuan's son?" Li Peiyin sighed and said, "I don't want to admit that it is true, but there is no other explanation except this. I personally supervised the execution of the Xianwei general's mansion. According to the law of the Tang Empire, there were very few people who could be exempted from punishment. They were all temporary hires without contract documents, so it is impossible for anyone to escape." Xiahou looked at the slightly swaying candle on the desk and said expressionlessly, "Lin Guangyuan only had 2 sons. Their characteristics were all recorded in the book and I personally checked them." Li Peiyin said, "Then it means that someone did something?" Xiahou said indifferently, "Even if Ning Ke is Lin Guangyuan's son, what can he do? Rubbing my hands, I will write 1 chapter today and 2 chapters tomorrow. This is the first day of the month. Everyone should vote for it. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 456. Xiahou's expression was very cold, like the snow that could be seen outside of Tiang City until late spring. His lips were as thin as iron, and his voice was naturally calm and domineering. The prince's revelation of Ning Ke's possible identity did not make the general vigilant, because he had absolute confidence in this matter. Li Peiyin was probably infected by his expression at this time. He thought that in the absence of evidence, it was impossible for anyone to reverse the verdict of the Xianwei general's treason case. His brother did not do anything back then and he would not do anything now. As for whether Ning Ke would deal with Xiahou like how he dealt with the dead in the file, it was not something that the 2 bigwigs in the study would worry about, because he did not have the ability to do so. Although Ning Ke was now a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy and had a special status as Mr. 13 of the academy, Mr. 13 was after all Mr. 13, not Mr. 1st or Mr. 2nd. Even Mr. 1st and Mr. 2nd did not have the confidence to defeat General Xiahou, let alone Ning Quebec. Li Peiyin said calmly, "The Imperial Court and old General Su Shi have investigated Ning Ke's background, and I have naturally done the same. Looking at his past these years, Ning Ke is a cold and ruthless person, but he is smart and knows his limits. He is very good at forbearance and he would never act rashly when he is not sure. Under the circumstances that the Academy has reached an agreement with you, he will definitely continue to forbearance because he is not powerful enough." He patted Xiahou's shoulder and comforted him. "As long as the real supermundane people in the Academy do not take action, Hu and Chang and can do anything to you?" Xiahou looked at the candle on the table and slightly frowned. He said, "The West Hill has looked for me." Li Peiyin's expression became slightly serious. He looked at his eyes and said slowly, "You must understand that the Imperial Court has found a rare opportunity to seize the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. The Academy is willing to allow you to leave safely. This opportunity is fleeting, and it is not wise for you to hesitate at this time." Xiahou was silent for a long time. Then he said in a low voice, "Everyone in the world understands this. However, there are many people who are absolutely unwilling to see me leave Chang and city like this." Li Peiyin thought of the news he had just received. He could not help but raise his eyebrows slowly. After a sigh he said, "You are right. People from Qinghe County have also come. Those old things seem to have smelled something and want to stir up trouble. At a time like this we should bear with it for a few days. No one in the Imperial Court, including His Majesty, likes the people from Qinghe County." Xiahou said, "If necessary before I leave I can kill a few more people for the Imperial Court. Of course, that is with His Majesty's permission." Li Peiyin thought of his royal brother, who was completely different from the emperors in the history books. A bitter smile appeared on his face. "The law is before us. How could His Majesty easily make such an exception?" Xiahou said, "Then let those fellows from Qinghe County live for a few more days. However, if they still try to stir up Her Majesty's mood, don't blame me for disregarding the law of the Tang Empire and being ruthless." Li Peiyin said, "Of course. If those fellows still do not understand the relationship between His Majesty and Her Majesty, they are courting death." Xiahou said, "Then I will leave first." Li Peiyin said, "Since the 2 young masters returned to the capital last year, They have been locked up in the general's mansion and did not interact with the court officials. I know this must be your intention. However, since you are back now, why do you still lock up the children so uncomfortably? Accompany me to the House of Red Sleeves to watch the song and dance. Let them come too. Xiahou said, I still have things to do tomorrow. I will come and drink with your highness after I finish them. Li Peiyan's expression changed slightly. He thought, you have already entered the palace today. What else do you have to do in Chang'an City? You know very well that the two young masters Xiahou locked themselves in the general's mansion. Before His Majesty's decree comes down, you should remain silent. What is there tomorrow that you are not afraid of breaking the taboo? Xiahou walked to the door of the study and stopped. He said, I will invite Ning Ke to drink tomorrow. Li Peiyan was slightly shocked. He looked at him and said, what are you going to do? Don't forget his identity. Although he can't do anything to you if you harm him, will the academy still remain silent? Xiahou said, I dare to drink with him. I dare to invite him, but I want to see if he dares to come. Because of the fight for the Minged Hand Scroll of the Tomes of Arcane in the wilderness, General Xiahou had offended the academy, which made His Majesty even angrier. However, this person had tens of thousands of cavalry under his command. He had opened up new territories for the Tang Empire. He was powerful and had meritorious military service. It was very troublesome for the imperial court to deal with him. After Mr. First of the Academy personally went to Tiang City to talk with Xiahou, General Xiahou accepted the proposal to retire without hesitation with an extremely strong will. This was the ending that the Tang Empire most wanted to see. Whether it was the palace, the military or the court officials, they were all extremely satisfied. That was why they gave Xiahou the highest honor and treatment. However, there was never anyone or anything in the world that could satisfy everyone. Under the glory of Haotian, there was still the devil's doctrine. Before the mountains of the academy, there were still people who were not very respectful to the headmaster. Naturally, Xiahou could not do this. Ning Ke was not satisfied with this ending, and neither was the West Hill. The emperor and the people of the Yan Kingdom, who had been bullied by Xiahou's cavalry for decades and had been silently waiting for the Tang Empire to fall out with each other and for Xiahou to become a miserable cooked dog, were also not satisfied. Even in the Tang Empire, some big powers were extremely disappointed. That power was the families of Qinghe County that His Highness had mentioned. Qinghe County was located in the southeast of the Tang Empire. It was rich and prosperous. Since ancient times, no one knew how many bigwigs had been cultivated there. Among them, the Chui, Qin and Song families were the leaders. They were known as the 7 families of Qinghe County. The 7 families of Qinghe County were, in fact, 7 aristocratic families. They had a long history even before the founding of the Tang Empire. Even the great divine priests of the West Hill Divine Palace were from these 7 aristocratic families. 1,000 years ago, the Tang Empire was founded with its cavalry. Its soldiers swept across the world. The West Hill Divine Palace secretly ordered all countries to join forces to resist, but they could not stop the birth and rise of this superpower. However, under such circumstances, Qinghe County, which was still in the southeast of the Tang Empire, was still under the strong protection of the 7 aristocratic families. It faced the pressure of Chang'an calmly and maintained political and economic independence. This situation lasted for more than a decade. The Tang Empire's cavalry went north to the grassland and defeated the desolate man tribes that made the people of the Central Plains tremble. They even successfully forced the desolate man to leave the grassland and move to the cold region in the far north. The prestige of Chang'an rose to an unprecedented and rare level in history. The hearts of the people gradually moved to the west. It was only then that the 7 families of Qinghe County finally decided to surrender. When the Tang Empire was founded, there were many things to do. There were many annexed counties that needed to be digested, and the people needed to recuperate. The 7 families of Qinghe County were too famous in the world. Therefore, the Taizu, who once used the power of the whole country to kill Qianli and destroy a tribe in the grassland because a small village was massacred, took a rare conciliatory policy towards Qinghe County. He made this a national policy and recorded it in his posthumous edict. In the early years of the Tang Empire, the academy in the south of Chang'an had just been built. There were very few students and the imperial court chose officials through the imperial examinations. Compared to the many counties that had just learned to read and write, the culturally prosperous Qinghe County could naturally benefit the most from the imperial examinations. In those years, the clansmen and students from Qinghe County entered Chang'an and through the imperial examinations. Nearly half of the candidates came from Qinghe County. The officials in the imperial court of Chang and the important positions in the temples were all controlled by the 7 families of Qinghe County. Because of the national policy established in the posthumous edict of the Taizu Emperor, the Tang imperial family treated Qinghe County with great respect. They often arranged marriages and even had 3 generations of empresses from the 7 families of Qinghe County. Sometimes there were sages who were worried and said that if this went on, it would be hard to tell whether the Tang Empire was the Tang Empire of the Li family or the Tang Empire of the Qinghe County. It turned out that the Tang Empire, which conquered the world by waving a padao on horseback, could not be conquered just because of the rule of law. The successive emperors in the early years of the Tang Empire all followed the style of their ancestors. They ruled while sitting on the dragon throne, but they firmly held the powerful military power in their sleeves. Nearly 900 years ago, in the 4th year of Tsonghua, the Tang Emperor was only 14 years old. Under the pressure of his mother and the court officials, he kept quiet for 4 years and studied for 4 years. Just 2 years before he took over the government, the young emperor did not hesitate to reach out his thin hand from his sleeves when his mother, who was surnamed Song from Qinghe County, tried to violate the posthumous edict of the late emperor and let his uncle, the Grand Secretary Song, who was also the prime minister, take over the military power. That hand held the military power, and the military power was a cold and merciless knife. That night, a light cavalry came out of the imperial city and went straight to the mansion of the Grand Secretary Song in the northern city. Blood flowed like a river in the mansion, and it was a tragic sight. The next day, countless officials cried blood and kowtowed to the imperial court, accusing the emperor of being cruel and heartless. The young emperor sat on the dragon throne and calmly, or rather indifferently, listened to the news that came from the palace gate. Then he waved his hand tiredly. The waving did not mean that he was backing down, because the young emperor did not issue an edict of his own crimes, but directly used the cane. That day, outside the palace, 148 officials of the imperial court were beaten to death by the cane. Their blood stained their official robes and the green ground, which seemed to be even darker than the palace walls. That night, the young emperor came to the academy in the southern suburbs of Chang, and under the protection of the bodyguards and the Yulin royal guards. No one knew what he said to someone in the academy that night, but the next day with a decree the Empress Dowager, who thought that she was more ambitious than the previous empresses of Qinghe County, was imprisoned in the cold palace. Since then no one had seen her. In the following period of time, officials from Qinghe County and various counties and states of the Tang Empire either submitted petitions to beg for forgiveness and loyalty, or were arrested by the secret guards and brought back to the capital to be imprisoned. For a time, countless heads fell to the ground, and a gloomy cloud floated over the entire empire. People were panicking. The turmoil in the imperial court and political affairs naturally caused serious damage to the power of the Tang Empire. However, the young emperor was like the ancestors of the Li family. At this moment he showed a strong will that did not care about the world being destroyed. He did not hesitate to continue purging anyone who dared to oppose him. After this incident, the essence that Qinghe County had accumulated for decades was completely destroyed, and the power of the 7 families was seriously damaged. More importantly, the proud and confident aristocratic families finally understood a principle. No matter how brilliant their surnames were, no matter how long the history of their families, as long as they dared to cross that line, they were still just little white rabbits under the butcher's knife in the eyes of the Li royal family. There is one more chapter today. In addition, if I do not say that there is more in the future, then, there is really no more. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 457. The blood and skulls of their clansmen woke the Qinghe County families up from their stupor. Especially in this chaos, no matter how much they tried to stir up public opinion, they still could not gain the sympathy of the people. They only attracted the disgust and disdain of the people, which shocked them even more. In the years that followed, they discovered even more shocking things. Those who were chosen to be sent to Chang and to be empress were the most outstanding and intelligent women of the Qinghe County families. They had received many years of education in their families. However, other than the Empress Dowager Song, who had been imprisoned during the Tsonghua period, all the empresses were known for being virtuous and quiet in the Chang and imperial palace. They were extremely silent when it came to court matters and rarely spoke up for the Qinghe County families. It was only then that the families realized that these intelligent empresses had already understood the general trend of the world. No country could escape the laws of history, and the invincible Tang Empire was no exception. With the long period of peace and the impossibility of endless wars, this big empire gradually became rigid and decayed with the passage of time. However, for some reason, compared to the glorious empires recorded in the history books of Qinghe County, this law of history had a much weaker effect on the Tang Empire. The speed at which the empire became rigid and decayed was very slow. Every time a major change was about to happen, there seemed to be some kind of force in the dark that would fix the overturned carriage of the Tang Empire and forcibly drag it back to the right path. As the Tang Empire grew stronger, the majesty of the royal family became more and more unshakable. After many years of suppression, the people of Qinghe County had long returned. Most importantly, the academy had quietly replaced part of the role of the imperial examinations. The families of Qinghe County no longer had the supreme glory they had 1,000 years ago, and their power and authority were much weaker than before. But the families of Qinghe County were, after all, families of thousands of generations. As they sincerely surrendered and changed their attitude towards Chang'an, they gradually returned to the stage of the world with the tacit consent of the royal family. Today, the families of Qinghe County still had power that could not be underestimated in the imperial court. They also worshipped many scholars. Although they were still far from military power, no one knew if there was a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state hidden in the depths of these secluded ancestral temples of thousands of generations. Therefore, even today, it was still the most beautiful dream of many men to be able to marry the daughter of the Qinghe River. The first wife of Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, was the daughter of the Chui clan of the Qinghe River. However, how could the families of Qinghe County, who once had limitless glory in the world, who once occupied most of the seats in the court, and who had produced several West Hill divine priests, be reconciled to the current situation? The aristocratic families were a cold existence. They instinctively wanted to seize more benefits. Therefore, although they did not dare to rebel and were so low-key that they were almost forgotten by the world, they still yearned to have a higher status and more power in the Tang Empire. Over the past few centuries, Qinghe County had produced another 9 empresses. This was the result of their efforts. More than a decade ago, they had tried to make Qinghe County have another empress. At that time, the current emperor had just ascended the throne, and the empress had unfortunately died of illness. The eyes of the Qinghe County officials were bloodshot. They were like vultures staring at rotten meat. They used all the power in the imperial court and the countryside to send the most outstanding and intelligent girl of the 7 families to the palace. After some planning and spending a lot of money, the emperor finally met the girl, and then a heart-stirring story was born. However, the Qinghe County officials had racked their brains to create this seemingly beautiful situation. However, they did not know that a bigwig named Lotus had already started a similar plan before them. Lotus won, and the saintess of the diabolism became the current empress. Lotus also lost because the empress fell in love and had long forgotten the mission of the diabolism. The Qinghe County officials were even more defeated. Not only did they lose their hopes, but they had also seriously offended the empress, which was equivalent to offending the prince and General Xiahou. The only one who had truly won was the emperor. Although the dukes of Qinghe County had lost badly, the fact that they dared to plot this showed the strength and confidence of these families. One must know that the Zhong family, which was the most powerful in Yangguan City, was only the weakest of the 7 families in Qinghe County. For more than a decade, because they had offended the empress and other bigwigs in Chang'an City, the families in Qinghe County became more and more low-key. Especially the elders in the family, they did not dare to enter the capital. This situation only changed after the imperial astronomer made the famous night curtain covering the stars. Everyone knew that the Tang emperor and the empress had a deep relationship, and the empress still looked radiant. She must be in good health and would not die early. Naturally, the East Palace would not have a chance to change hands to Qinghe County. However, fortunately, the emperor still had a very favored princess. Now, the families in Qinghe County could not be on good terms with the empress, so naturally they began to support the princess without hesitation. More accurately, they supported the Prince Li Huiyuan whom the princess assisted. In a quiet mansion in the southern city of Chang'an, a calm old man sat in the study of the backyard. This old man's surname was Song, and he was a minister of offerings in the Song clan. Even in the imperial court, he had an official status. 20 years ago, Minister of Offerings Song was a visiting professor in the Imperial Center Administration. However, he knew very well that this status was more of a reward from the imperial court to the Song clan in Qinghe County. Therefore, he had never cared about the affairs of the Imperial Center Administration, and had never even entered Chang'an City. However, he finally came today. General Xiahou was about to retire, and the power of the empress seemed to have been severely weakened. However, in the eyes of the dukes of Qinghe County, This move had successfully resolved all the conflicts that had accumulated over the past decades. They did not want to see Xiahou leave Chang'an City with a smile. Censor Song Ku stood respectfully in front of the old man and said bitterly, "Third ancestor, the imperial court has already made a decision. Everyone knows His Majesty's intentions. No matter how we persuade him now, there are not many colleagues who are willing to submit a petition with me. Although it is not wrong to spread rumors, this matter involves the general and we have to be careful." Minister Song frowned and thought of the glory of his family in the imperial court. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Back then the General Xian was a member of the family, and contacting a dozen censors to submit a petition was a small matter. It was not as difficult as it is now. Don't make it too difficult. If it doesn't work, then forget it." Censor Song did not dare to say more, but his expression was clearly much more relaxed. "Now it seems that we can only pin our hopes on Mr. 13. The old Minister of Offerings said expressionlessly, "If this really happens, the Academy will definitely break off relations with General Xiahou. By then, how can the Empress' son ascend to the throne?" Censor Song was not a cultivator. Although he knew that many ministers in the imperial court came from the Academy, he still could not understand what the old ancestor was saying. He thought to himself, what right does the Academy have to decide the succession of the throne? The old Minister of Offerings sighed and said, "Mr. 13 was not afraid of the laws of the Tang Empire. He killed Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu on the rainy street because he was strong enough and was confident that no one would be able to use against him. However, in front of Xiahou, the strong and the weak are easy to deal with. If I were him, I would not know how to do it either." No matter how fast his state improved in the past 2 years, he is still no match for Xiahou. Xiahou can kill him with one finger. Censor Song was confused and asked subconsciously, "Should we help Mr. 13 in secret?" The old Minister of Offerings glanced at him and slightly furrowed his white eyebrows. He lectured, "Xiahou is the Academy's method. If Ning Ke forcefully breaks the rules, the Academy will not help him, but they will not stop him either. The most likely scenario is that they will watch quietly from the side. However, that is because Ning Ke is a student of the headmaster of the Academy. If we interfere in this matter, do you really think that the Academy will not dare to do anything to Qinghe County?" Censor Song smiled awkwardly. In his heart, he thought, if the family does not dare to interfere in this matter, then there is no reason for you to come to Chang'an City. The old Minister of Offerings guessed what his distant nephew was thinking, but he did not give any explanation. He slowly closed his eyes. He did not need to pretend to be mysterious at this moment because he was really thinking hard about how to defeat Xiahou on behalf of Mr. 13 of the Academy. If Ning Ke did not understand, then this battle would never happen. If the old Minister of Offerings did not understand, then the families of Qinghe County and Her Highness would not be able to benefit from this matter. The confusion of the officials of Qinghe County was also the confusion of many people in Chang'an City. As the rumors of Ning Ke's parentage spread within a very limited range, the bigwigs in the imperial palace and the mansions of princes and dukes were all frowning and thinking about what Ning Ke would do without the support of the Academy. Those bigwigs who had vaguely guessed the inside story, like His Highness the Prince, were not fooled by Ning Ke's seemingly frivolous and roguish disguise. They all knew that Ning Ke had strong self-control, was very rational, and even appeared cold and heartless because of his rationality. At a time when there was no hope, logically speaking, Ning Ke should not do anything. The bigwigs thought hard for a long time for Ning Ke, but they could not find any hope. Therefore they gradually relaxed and felt that Chang'an City would be peaceful this autumn. There would not be any problems between the Academy and the military. At this moment, a piece of news from the general's mansion spread to the imperial palace and also to the mansions of the princes and dukes. It made these bigwigs confused and uneasy. General Xiahou had invited Mr. 13 of the Academy, Ning Ke, to his mansion tonight. In the house by the Yanming Lake. Yi Hongyu looked at Ning Ke, who was in the shadow of the locust tree. She looked at his expression and suddenly said, "Now I know why you need power." Ning Ke said, "You are indeed the Grand Master of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall. You escaped from the Peach Mountain and lived in seclusion in Chang'an City, but you still received such secret information." Yi Hongyu said, "Of course you must avenge your father's death, but now is obviously the most inappropriate time. You can't even beat me now, how can you kill Xiahou?" Ning Ke said, "When did I say that I wanted to kill Xiahou?" Feeling. Yi Hongyu said calmly, "This autumn lake, the house by the lake, Sang Sang's cooking, your breath, and the smell of the garden all tell me that you are preparing to kill." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Killing is against the law of the Tang Empire. Teacher and eldest brother do not allow me to do so." Yi Hongyu said, "Then why do you still want to go to the banquet?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "Why should I not go if I can eat for free? I can't beat him now, nor can I kill him, so I can only eat all the delicacies in the general's mansion. It can be considered as revenge." Yi Hongyu naturally did not believe his words. She said, "If there is really a dispute between you and Xiahou, the Divine Hall will benefit a lot from it, so I will not stop you." Ning Ke said, "I asked Sang Sang to prepare supper, so I will come back alive." After writing these 2 chapters, I suddenly felt that my mind was as empty as a wild field. I was shocked and frightened, so I hurried to organize the details of the later chapters. I know it is taboo, but I can't help but say that I have not been in a good state these days. What I wrote feels a little long-winded. I want to correct it, so I will start from the next chapter. I will try my best to think about it. Please continue to support me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 458. The general's mansion did not prepare any delicacies for tonight's banquet. The long square table set between the autumn trees in the courtyard was dark in color. There were some very ordinary dishes on it, but it had its own solemn atmosphere. There were not many servants and maidservants serving at the table. Serving the dishes was actually done by the 2 young masters Xiahou. Such a scene was completely different from the extravagance of General Xiahou in the rumors. At this time, probably the entire Chang'an city was paying attention to this banquet. However, the atmosphere at the banquet was not as hostile as people imagined. Xiahou and Ning Ke, who sat opposite each other at the long table, just ate in silence and occasionally talked about the scenery of the wilderness and their encounters at the front gate. The simple banquet very simply came to an end. The maidservants filed in and quietly took away the leftovers on the long table. Then they served 2 plates of blue teapots. The 2 young masters Xiahou served the first cup of tea to Ning Ke and then very politely bid farewell. They walked out of the garden and asked all the maidservants and stewards to stay far away. Then they quietly guarded the garden gate. The teapot and the teacup were the same color as the blue sky. It was rather spacious but warm and not eye-catching. The tea was black fir tea, which was also very mild. Even the temperature of the tea was just right at this time. Ning Ke attentively looked at the teapot and slowly reached out to touch the teacup. Then he raised his head and looked at Xiahou at the other end of the long table. He was as focused and serious as he was when he looked at the teapot a moment ago. It was just like when he first saw Prince Li Peiyan in front of the hall of the academy 2 years ago. It was as if he wanted to burn Xiahou's face into his own eyes. Xiahou looked at the large piece of black fir tea in the cup that rose and fell in the slightly heavy warm well water. He knew that Ning Ke was staring at him. A slightly mocking smile slowly appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said, "Do you want to see clearly what your enemy looks like? You are not so presumptuous in Tiang City." Ning Ke did not deny what he said, nor did he admit it. His fingers gently turned the small sky-blue teacup and said, "In Tiang City, the person I respected was eldest brother, not you." Hearing this, Xiahou slowly raised his head. As he moved, the black fur in the teacup seemed to be suddenly hit and sank to the bottom of the cup. Ning Ke lowered his head. Xiahou looked at him expressionlessly. The autumn wind suddenly rose in the courtyard, and the treetops rustled. Countless yellow leaves of different shades were blown off the branches and landed on the long table and the ground in front of the 2 people. If it had been someone else, facing General Xiahou's strong coercion and the killing intent brought by the autumn wind and yellow leaves, and thinking of the deep hatred between the 2, even if they were not afraid, they would probably feel a little nervous. However, Ning Ke was not. There was not even a trace of expression on his face. Xiahou looked into his eyes. Without any warning, he suddenly asked, "Are you Lin Guangyuan's son?" Ning Ke looked at the darkening tea in the cup and shook his head. The autumn wind, carrying with it an austere aura, continued to linger in the courtyard, brushing off more leaves. Then it brushed the yellow leaves on the table to the ground, and the yellow leaves on the ground to the surroundings. Xiahou said, "I have killed many people in my life. I don't care." Ning Ke finally raised his head and looked at him, saying, "General is mighty." The yellow leaves on the ground were blown around by the autumn wind and did not stop until they reached the corner of the wall. It looked like the waves of a lake hitting against the embankment. Xiahou said, "Hatred sometimes has to be resolved even if it can't be resolved." The leaves piled up higher and higher in the corner of the courtyard. The leaves on the top rustled down and were blown up again by the autumn wind that still occupied the ground. The austere autumn wind did not give the leaves any chance to escape. Just like the conversation at this time, Xiahou said 3 sentences. They seemed to have no connection with each other, but they were extremely strong and pressed forward step by step, not giving Ning Ke any chance to retreat. Ning Ke looked at the yellow leaves that were struggling and cowering in the corner and asked, "Please enlighten me." Xiaoho looked at him expressionlessly and said, "You can't touch me." Ning Ke turned to look at him and said, "But you dare not touch me either." Being unable to move and not daring to move, it sounded like there was no difference between the two, but in fact there was a big difference. The former meant that Ning Ke did not have the ability, and the latter meant that Xiaoho did not have the courage. Xiaoho said, "Because of this, even if it can't be resolved, it has to be resolved. Or maybe you can wait for another 20 years until I really become old and weak. At that time, you must be dying and have enjoyed 20 years of peace." Ning Ke looked at him and said with a smile, "Of course I'm just stating the facts. Don't misunderstand me, General. In fact, I think that since you are going to retire soon, you shouldn't say these inauspicious words." Hearing the word retire, Xiaoho slightly narrowed his eyes, and an indifferent expression appeared on his dark face. He said, "Whether it is the Imperial Court or the West Hill, they all think that I can retire safely, so I should be very satisfied. In fact, I am not satisfied. The tens of thousands of cavalries under my command are enough to sweep away all the countries. I have made countless contributions for the Tang Empire and the West Hill, but the Imperial Court and His Majesty have always looked at me coldly because of those small things. If not, why would I go to the wilderness to snatch the tomes of arcane? Why would there be the current situation?" Ning Ke asked, "General, are you explaining to me?" Xiaoho did not hide his disdain for him and said mockingly, "If you were not lucky enough to become a disciple of the headmaster of the academy, what qualifications do you have to sit in front of me? Even so, what qualifications do you have for me to explain to you? I just want you to know that I am not in a good mood right now." Ning Ke said, "In your previous words, you described the bloody storm in Chang'an and the massacre in the Yen territory as small things. This made me not in a good mood." At this point in the conversation, someone finally pointed out what happened in the past. "I don't need to care about your mood." Xiaoho looked at him coldly and said, "Because as I said before, you can't touch me. And if I'm in a bad mood you have to care. Because if you really make me angry I can crush you like an ant. So I advise you to make me feel better in the days before I leave Chang'an." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I can't imagine how you can crush me. For example, at this moment in this autumn garden." Xiaoho said expressionlessly, "Mr. 13 of the Academy tried to assassinate the General of the Empire, but failed miserably and was smashed into meat paste by me." Ning Ke took a sip of the slightly astringent tea and smiled bitterly, "Crush me? General, you and the General's mansion, as well as the clansmen and relatives you sent back to your hometown, will also be crushed by my teacher." In the Tang Empire, the person who could really make Xiaoho silent out of fear and not dare to do anything rash was never the emperor, but the headmaster of the academy in the back of the mountain. Xiaoho looked at him and said indifferently, "As I said before, I dare not touch you and you can't touch me. So the position of host and guest is in my hands. In the days before I leave Chang'an, if you really want to do something that I can't tolerate, then I will try to touch you." Ning Ke asked seriously, "Is this a threat?" Xiaoho said, "I am teaching you that any background and backing is meaningless. In the face of real life and death, only your own strength is worthy of trust." Ning Ke looked at him and laughed. He said, "Back then my youngest uncle defeated the devil's doctrine with one sword. General found that your background and backing had all disappeared, so you betrayed your sect and joined the West Hill? But my situation is different. The headmaster of the academy is not Lotus, and the academy is not the devil's doctrine. General, you can rest assured." This sentence directly uncovered the deepest secrets in Xiaoho's heart. It could be said to be the most naked slap in the face, so General Xiaoho's face turned scarlet. Not every time he blushed it was because he was drunk. Tonight he was drinking tea. General Xiaoho's face turned red because he was angry. Ning Ke dared to mock him like this, naturally because he was sure that even if the other party was the great general of the army, no matter how violent and bloodthirsty he would not dare to do anything to him, who came from the academy. Sure enough, Xiaoho looked at him quietly, as if he was looking at a withered leaf on the table. The scarlet color on his face gradually disappeared, and his emotions gradually calmed down. He said, "See the guest out?" Ning Ke gently shook off a leaf that had fallen on his black academy uniform. He did not bid farewell to Xiaoho, who was sitting across the long table. He stood up and left the autumn garden. The autumn wind in the garden gradually calmed, and the pile of yellow leaves that had been blown to the corner gradually dispersed. The two Xiahou masters walked back into the garden and looked at their silent father. They wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Nothing. Xiahou said expressionlessly, a person who does not even dare to admit his own identity in front of the enemy who killed his father may be very smart, calm and rational, but these qualities are meaningless. Standing across the table but not daring to take revenge for the family, it is a great humiliation. He knows this very well, so he felt humiliated and used words to humiliate me. Is he trying to seek psychological comfort through this? He only knows how to talk but he does not know how to fight. A person who lacks the most basic courage to become a powerhouse is not worthy to be my enemy. General Xiahou's invitation to Ning Ke was definitely the most important thing in Chang'an that day. When Ning Ke walked into the general's mansion, many bigwigs began to feel anxious and nervous. There were many spies hidden outside the general's mansion, and they continuously transmitted the situation of the banquet back to the palace or other places. No one knew the specific situation of the banquet in the general's mansion. But since Ning Ke walked out alive, it meant that nothing had happened at the banquet, because it meant that General Xiahou did not take action. As for Ning Ke killing Xiahou and walking out without any blood on his body in everyone's eyes, this possibility did not exist. In the imperial study, His Majesty was deep in thought. In a hall not far away, the Empress and Grand Secretary Zheng Jing looked at each other with a slightly peaceful expression. General Su Shi, who had been in charge of the military ministry, nodded after hearing the news. But the old Minister of Offerings from Qinghe County who lived in the censor's mansion could not help but feel a little regretful. On the top floor of the Wanyan Tower, the nation master of Tang, Li Qingshan, stood by the stone window and looked in the direction of the general's mansion. He said with relief, I have always been worried about Ning Ke's temperament. Now it seems that after studying with the headmaster of the academy for such a long time, he is much more sensible than before. Senior brother Yen Sei did not hand over his mantle and the array eye to him in vain. Master Huang Yang looked at him and smiled slightly, saying nothing. Li Qingshan left the side of the tower and walked back to the table. He pushed the Buddhist scriptures aside, took out a few black and white chess pieces from his arms, and casually threw them on the table. He had not recovered from his injury, but when he was in a good mood, he wanted to do something. This divination was completely random and he did not want to peep into the mysteries of heaven. He just wanted to see if he could be lucky enough to get any response. A pure white chess piece suddenly spun, and it spun faster and faster until it finally spun out of the table and landed on the hard floor. With a crisp crack, the white chess piece split into two halves. The crack was smooth and traceless as if it had been cut by a sharp sword. Li Qingshan stared at the white chess piece, and his expression gradually became serious. Huang Yang suddenly frowned and said in shock, "What a terrible sword. Did Liu Bai come to Chang'an? You also know that the first big note of the story, Nightfall, is about to arrive. We need to be careful and careful. We need to build up momentum before we can unleash it. This note is not only about the destined battle with Xiahou. More importantly, this big plot needs to set the tone or temperament of the whole book in Ning Quebec. I am very confident that we can do this job well together. See you tomorrow. No, tomorrow is a Saturday off. See you all the day after tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 459. The autumn wind blew into the tower and Chang'an knew no sorrow. The autumn grain from various counties was transported to the city one after another. The good harvest not only smoothed out the wrinkles on the faces of the rural farmers, but also brought smiles to the faces of the people in the city. Ginkgo leaves fell from the branches and covered the long street. It did not look solemn but elegant. Like in other seasons, many tourists from other counties and even foreign countries came to Chang'an with the autumn grain. Among them was a man in a light white robe. There was some dust on the man's robe, and he carried a long sword on his back. His expression was calm and gentle. Only a few people could understand the pride and indifference hidden in the depths of his eyes. He walked on the crowded streets of Chang'an. Although there were crowds of people in front of him, he only saw the historical buildings of Chang and that had experienced thousands of years of wind and frost. There were no people in his eyes. This was the most prosperous and bustling city in the world, Chang'an. However, this man in a light white robe did not seem to feel the liveliness here. To be more precise, although his body was in the bustling mortal world, his spirit was not in this world but in the smell of this city. Over the years, whether he was in the mortal world or outside the mortal world, that was where his body was, but his heart had been wandering outside the mortal world. Therefore there was no prosperity in his eyes, not even people. A few naughty children ran past the man with frosted fruit sticks in their hands. One of the crying little girls almost wiped her tears on his body. He frowned slightly as he looked at the little girl's back and slowly shook his head. A moment ago he looked at the empty street and sensed the historical aura of this 1,000-year-old city. He was just about to recite a verse, but he was disturbed by these naughty children, so he immediately lost interest. Standing in front of the stall, he watched the short boss skillfully string all kinds of fruits together and then roll them in the sugar paddle pot. Suddenly he felt that it was pointless and walked towards the north of the city. At the top of the Wanyan Tower, Li Qingshan looked at the white chess piece that had been inexplicably split in two. He looked at the extremely smooth section of the chess piece, and his expression was solemn and complicated. There was a touch of confusion and emotion hidden in the shock. "You actually came to Chang'an? It seems that the situation is getting more and more troublesome." Huang Yang frowned and asked, "Is it really Lu Bai, the Sword Saint?" Li Qingshan shook his head and sighed gently. "It's not Lu Bai but someone even more troublesome than Lu Bai." Huang Yang was slightly startled. "Is there someone more troublesome than Lu Bai?" "Yes," said Li Qingshan. Then he looked at Huang Yang and said with a serious expression, "I must leave to welcome that person. In the following days if that person does not leave Chang'an, you must stay in the palace." Hearing this, Huang Yang remained silent and prepared to enter the palace. Li Qingshan's meaning was very clear. The expert who came to Chang'an City had the terrifying power to directly threaten His Majesty in the imperial palace. They even needed to work together to ensure His Majesty's safety. Therefore when he went to meet the expert, Huang Yang had to stay in the palace and stay there forever. How many people in the world could pose a threat to the Tang Emperor in Chang'an? Just a few of them. The southern gate temple of Haotian was in the north city, very close to the imperial palace. Li Qingshan stood at the gate of the Taoist temple and looked at the vermilion palace wall and turret not far away. He was silent. No one could tell that he was extremely depressed and anxious at this time. The man in a light white robe walked slowly from the other end of the long street, accompanied by the autumn wind and fallen leaves. His clothes were ordinary, and only a simple Taoist bun indicated his origin. Li Qingshan looked at him and bowed calmly. "Greetings, Mr. Yi Su." The man was the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, Yi Su. Yi Su looked calm and bowed back. "Greetings, Jinren Li." His way of addressing Li Qingshan was very interesting. He did not call him Nation Master or Great Divine Priest, but Jinren Li. This was a very Taoist title. In history, the Abbey Dean of the Southern Gate Temple of Haotian Taoism often served as the Nation Master of Tang. His position in the West Hill Divine Palace was similar to that of the three great divine priests on Peach Mountain. Although Yi Su was unknown in the Divine Hall as a world wayfarer, his position in Haotian Taoism was extremely special. He was qualified to be on equal footing with the three great divine priests of West Hill. When Li Qingshan was conferred the title of Great Divine Priest, he had been to the Jishou Abbey. It was the only time he had been to the Jishou Abbey. He knew that the simple and even shabby Taoist temple was the real spirit of Haotian Taoism. Therefore, facing the person from the Jishou Abbey in front of him, he could not help but be vigilant. The man in front of him with a simple Taoist bun and a sword on his back was not an ordinary person. He was the legendary Yi Su, the most powerful person in the younger generation of Haotian Taoism. His state was no less than that of the three great divine priests of the Divine Hall. There were even rumors that this person's state was slightly on the same level as Lu Bai's. As the Nation Master of Tang, Li Qingshan had already reached the highest peak of Haotian Taoism in the secular world. Yi Su's identity and strength did not shock him. Even though he was in a high state, he could not help but admire the predecessor who built Chang'an 1,000 years ago and turned this magnificent city into a god-stunning array. Then he continued walking. Just as he said to Li Qingshan, he walked without any purpose. He walked completely according to his heart. He followed the hawkers, passed through the streets and alleys, looked at the kites and walked casually. When he was a little thirsty, he would borrow a ladle of water from the well at the entrance of the alley. He did not stop walking. In a very quiet street he saw a simple Taoist temple. At the entrance of the Taoist temple, a Taoist priest was preaching the West Hill scriptures to the people. More than a dozen neighbors carried small stools and sat there listening attentively. From time to time, someone would raise their hand to ask about something they did not understand in the scriptures. Yi Su stood outside the crowd and listened quietly to the preaching of the doctrine. He felt that it was different from the preaching he had heard in other places in the world. Especially the questions and even doubts from the people who were listening from time to time made him feel very uncomfortable. He even felt a little disgusted and angry. A middle-aged man noticed him standing behind him. He saw that he was a little unfamiliar and thought that he was a tourist from another county. He stood up with great enthusiasm and invited him to sit down and listen. Yisu was not used to the innate enthusiasm of the people of Chang'an. After a slight pause, he shook his head and declined. He looked expressionlessly at the Taoist priest who was stuttering on the stone steps. He watched as the Taoist priest stuttered in front of the people's harmless questions. His expression became a little ugly. To Yisu, Haoyan Taoism was his home and country. Even if the Southern Gate Temple was independent of the West Hill Divine Palace, it was still his place. That was why he went to see Li Qingshan as soon as he entered Chang'an. That was why when he traveled around the world, he would often hide his identity and visit various Taoist temples. In the Taoist temples of other countries, some Taoist priests might be greedy and stupid, but at least Haoyan Taoism enjoyed supreme respect and glory. He had never seen a follower dare to ask a Taoist priest questions. He could not imagine that a follower would dare to doubt the records in the scriptures. Since he was a follower of Haoyan, he should obey the scriptures and not doubt them. No matter whether the doubt was reasonable or not, as long as he began to doubt it, it would be blasphemy. This was Yisu's opinion. A voice sounded beside him. "What's your opinion?" The speaker was a scholar in an old coat. The scholar's eyes were unusually clean and he had a water ladle tied to his waist. He did not hold the old book in his hand today. Yisu looked at the scholar and was silent for a long time. Then he said, "This is Chang'an. My opinion is not as important as yours." This scholar was naturally the eldest brother of the academy. The eldest brother smiled and said, "If I remember correctly, this should be your first time in Chang'an. Since you are here, you should stay for a few more days. Perhaps you will have a different opinion after seeing more." Yisu said, "I hope so too. 2 chapters tomorrow? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 460. The Taoist priest on the stone steps gradually controlled the atmosphere and did not let the questions continue. He waved his arms and kept spitting saliva, reciting the profound words in the scriptures. His expression was sometimes solemn, sometimes passionate, sometimes compassionate, and sometimes stern. The dozen neighbors who were listening to him were very focused. Their bodies leaned forward and backward from time to time. They could not help covering their mouths and listening to the Haoyan miracles that had been discovered somewhere. They could not help but feel sympathy and yearning for the martyrs. No one noticed the existence of eldest brother and Yisu. Although they were the greatest figures in the academy in Haoyan Taoism, there was nothing special about them on the surface. After a brief conversation, the two formally greeted each other. Yisu stood with one hand in front of his chest and the other clenched fist against the edge of his palm. He looked calm and slightly lowered his head, saying, "Greetings, Mr. First." Eldest brother kept his composure and returned the greeting seriously. "Greetings, Mr. Yi." Yisu said, "I thought Mr. Second would be the first to appear." Eldest brother smiled and said, "My teacher was worried that Junimo would come and destroy Chang'an City, so he imprisoned him in the back mountain." Hearing the word teacher, Yisu thought of the headmaster of the academy who was admired by countless people in the cultivation world. After a moment of silence, he said seriously, "I wonder if I have the chance to meet the headmaster of the academy?" Eldest brother said, "I will ask my teacher." Yisu said, "Thank you, Mr. First." Eldest brother looked into his eyes and suddenly asked, "Are you here to see Chang'an or Xiaohou?" Yisu said, "Xiaohou is an elder of the Divine Hall after all, and it was my teacher who personally led him to the Divine Hall. He has done a great service to Haoyan Taoism. Although he once had some delusions in the wilderness, it does not make up for his contributions. Haoyan Taoism hopes to see him have a good ending. I think the Tang Emperor and his ministers also do not want to see a dog being cooked." Eldest brother said gently, "There is no such thing in the academy. Contributions are contributions and mistakes are mistakes. One must bear the responsibility. However, since General Xiaohou is willing to return peacefully, I think no one will stop him. Moreover, he is a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts. Who can stop him?" Yisu said, "Xiaohou is old and he was seriously injured by the Tang. I know this and I think the headmaster and Mr. First should be even more aware of it. If he was still the Xiaohou of the past, why would my master send a message for me to come to Chang and to take a look? Or is it that Mr. First doesn't welcome me?" Eldest brother said, "The Tang Empire is an open-minded country. Chang'an welcomes anyone. Yisu looked at the commoner who gave up his stool to him and said, the Tang Empire is indeed different from other countries. The main thing is the atmosphere. Eldest brother smiled and said, I hope you can enjoy your stay in Chang'an. Not very pleasant, said Yisu. If an ordinary tourist met a black-hearted shopkeeper in Chang'an or ate an extremely expensive vegetarian meal in Wanyan Tower Temple, he might be very unhappy, but it would not have any impact on the world. Yisu had just arrived in Chang'an, and his unhappiness seemed unreasonable. However, he was a world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, and his unhappiness might bring some unhappiness to Chang'an. Hearing him say that he was unhappy, even eldest brother's expression gradually became solemn. He asked seriously, what's the matter? Yisu looked at the Taoist priest on the stone steps of the Taoist temple and said, this place is not pleasant. Eldest brother turned around and silently listened to the Taoist priest's preaching for a while. After listening to the neighbor's questions, he roughly understood where Yisu's unhappiness came from. For thousands of years, the Jishou Abbey had always been very dissatisfied with the preaching of Haotian Taoism in the Tang Empire. However, these things were handled by the South School of Haotian Taoism, especially since the Tang Empire had the Academy and the Iron Cavalry. Therefore, the West Hill Divine Palace had never been able to make a deeper impact. However, when a proud son of Haotian like Yisu suddenly heard a discussion in a remote alley of Chang and that was completely different from the rest of the world, he was naturally unhappy. Eldest brother said, believing in Haotian doesn't mean believing in Haotian Taoism, and it doesn't mean that you can't raise your own questions about the teachings of the West Hill Divine Palace. Yisu quietly looked at the scholar in front of him. He had seen him by the Hulun Sea, but it was not a chance for them to have a long and peaceful conversation on the city wall of Chang'an like today. Therefore he looked carefully and seriously, trying to understand why this person could sit on the other side of the line. He thought he had already understood some parts. What about you people from the academy? Yisu looked at eldest brother's eyes and said calmly, I can understand you. I know that you don't even believe in Haotian, so do you think that you can even doubt Haotian? Eldest brother smiled slightly and did not deny or defend himself. Yisu also smiled. His smile seemed indifferent and cold. He said, there is indeed a group of terrible people living in the academy. You should not exist at all. Eldest brother sincerely asked, why do you say so? Yisu looked into his eyes and said in a low and cold voice, there is no reverence if there is no faith. Those who do not know reverence will naturally not care about the torrential flood. Mr. Ku was like that back then. Will the next generation of the academy be like that? Then who will it fall on? You or Mr. Second or that guy Ninkei? Eldest brother looked at him and said calmly, the academy only teaches us the truth, not the faith. In fact, among my younger brothers and younger sisters, there are a few devout Haotian believers. However, we believe in another saying. Being able to have no faith is actually a kind of faith. Not having faith was actually a kind of faith. Yisu frowned slightly and repeated this sentence in his heart. He seemed to be thinking about something. Eldest brother said, if one day in the future you can agree or even just respect our faith, then you will actually have the same faith. Yisu looked up at the sky. The branches of the yellow leaf trees on the street in autumn cut the sky above their heads, but they could not stop the clear sunlight from shining down from the vault of heaven and then shining on everything. Haotian's divine light shines on the world. When it falls on the flowers bloom. When it falls on the trees sprout. When it falls on the fields there are ears of grain. Flowers can entertain the eyes, trees can provide shade, and ears of grain can make people live. Then they wither and fall into the dust, turning into nutrients to nourish the earth, and the earth regenerates everything. Yisu looked at the autumn sunlight that leaked through the branches, and his eyes gradually emitted a faint luster. He said calmly and firmly, everything in the world originates from Haotian. Haotian has given everything to human beings including life. And the dignity and freedom of civilization are attached to life. Therefore, faith in Haotian is not faith but the way the world should operate. Eldest brother imitated him and looked up at the sky. His eyes fell on the clear autumn sky, but he did not have the same feelings as Ning Quebec. He only felt that the sun was a little too strong today, and the air in Chang'an was not good recently. He wondered which iron furnace workshop was violating the rules again. Yisu withdrew his gaze from the sky and noticed that the scholar beside him was obviously distracted. He could not help but feel a little unhappy. Eldest brother felt his gaze and rubbed his eyes awkwardly. Then he said seriously, the academy has never wanted to deny that Haotian has given everything to the world, but this does not mean that everything in the world belongs to Haotian. Yisu said, You are twisting the truth. Eldest brother said, just like our parents gave us flesh and life, it does not mean that everything we have belongs to our parents. Because we learn the way of learning from our teachers, the way of getting along with our companions, and the way of nature from the fields. These acquired things are our own. Yisu asked, what about the headmaster? For the disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy, the headmaster was their faith. Yisu's question seemed very simple, but in fact, it was the most difficult one to answer. Eldest brother thought about filial piety for a moment and said, the headmaster once said that human beings should respect their teachers, but they should also respect reason. If the headmaster is wrong, we as his students should certainly point out his mistakes. This is the true way of a disciple, and it is also the way of faith in my opinion. Yisu looked at him and asked sarcastically, may I ask, Mr. First has studied under the headmaster for many years, have you ever seen the headmaster make mistakes, and how many times have you pointed out his mistakes? Eldest brother could not help but be speechless. He thought that among all the disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy, only Junyan had dared to speak out against the headmaster. In the past 6 months, youngest brother seemed to have been this brave, but only he had not pointed out any mistakes of the headmaster. He did not feel ashamed because in his view, the headmaster was indeed a perfect person without any shortcomings. But he was very clear that Yisu would definitely think that his statement was absurd. Looking at his embarrassed expression, Yisu sneered and felt indescribably happy. He thought that even if you were on the side and I was on the side, there were still times when you were not as good as me. Eldest brother suddenly thought of something, and his eyes suddenly brightened. He clapped his hands and said happily, for years ago, the headmaster put an extra spoonful of soy sauce when he was cooking braised pork. I pointed it out on the spot. Yisu was startled and asked coldly, can that be counted? Eldest brother said seriously, of course it can be counted. Yisu's eyebrows twitched slightly, and his emotions reached the critical point of exploding. Since many years ago, he had always regarded the scholar beside him as a goal to pursue, and thought that he was a very respectable opponent. But he did not expect that after getting to know him, he found that he did not have any demeanor of a master at all, and was no different from those poor scholars who failed to pass the examinations. Eldest brother noticed that the sword style in Yisu's eyes was getting brighter and brighter, and could not help but feel helpless, thinking that he was indeed not good at fighting. The truth is not clear without debate. Eldest brother said, since we have different ideas, why don't we listen to the opinions of these ordinary people? Yisu looked at the Chang'an citizens who were sitting in their chairs, leaning back and forth and looking relaxed. He frowned and said, since when does a goshawk need to care about the opinions of ants? Eldest brother shook his head and said, in fact, we did not fly that high. Yisu thought for a moment and then walked into the crowd. Eldest senior brother smiled faintly and followed. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 461. The eldest brother and Yisu walked to the stone steps and whispered to the Taoist. The Taoist was a little surprised and unhappy, especially when he clenched his right fist in his sleeve and waited for a long time without receiving any money. He was even more dissatisfied. However, when he looked at the Taoist bun on Yisu's head, the Taoist found that he had lost all courage to stop them and could only remain silent. The dozen or so neighbors who came to the small Taoist temple to listen to the preaching of the scriptures were immersed in the historical story told by the Taoist. They occasionally questioned but still listened with great interest. At this time, they suddenly found that the preaching was interrupted and 2 people stood in front of the Taoist. They could not help but be surprised. Yisu's face was expressionless. For him, if it was not for the ideological battle with Mr. First of the Academy, he had no interest in talking to these ordinary people in this chaotic world. Next, I will explain the essence of the 3 essentials of Haotian Taoism. Then he looked at the eldest brother and said, Mr. First is welcome to ask any questions. The eldest brother nodded calmly. Yisu began to talk about his understanding of Haotian Taoism. The eldest brother occasionally raised his doubts. One was the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism and the successor of the Jisho Abbey. He studied the scriptures of Haotian Taoism since he was a child and later traveled to many countries. He broke through the barrier of life and death and had a deep understanding of morality. He was the most outstanding person in the world. The other was Mr. First of the Academy, the first disciple of the headmaster of the Academy. He was well versed in the 6 arts and had followed the headmaster of the Academy to travel around the world. His state was unfathomable. Although his words and actions were slow, he was the most intelligent person. At this moment they were debating with each other in front of the crowd. Naturally, the two of them weren't as calm and direct as they were when they were talking in private. Both of them looked for evidence from the ancient books and notes of famous experts, and they looked for comrades. Their words were brief but not comprehensive, and then they became profound. Every word they said contained an extremely deep meaning. No matter how one looked at it, the debate between Mr. First of the Academy and Yi Su, the successor of the Jisho Abbey, was undoubtedly a legendary event that was destined to be recorded in history. If the people of the cultivation world were to find out about this, they would definitely be shocked to the extreme. In order to be able to participate in such a grand event, to be able to hear the voices of these two experts that were only above the clouds, even if they were on the verge of death, they would still call for their disciples to carry them over on stretchers to listen respectfully. The eldest brother looked at Yi Su and said with a bitter smile, "It seems that the so-called struggle of ideas is meaningless. Because if you are always floating in the clouds, how can you land? I don't have a residence in Chang'an City, so I'll stay in this Taoist temple for the time being." Yi Su looked into his eyes and said straightforwardly, "I came to Chang'an City not only to see Xiaoho, but also because of that matter. I heard from my master that you had been sitting on the other side of the black line 15 years ago. Since you also experienced it, in your opinion, is that youngest brother of yours the one?" The eldest brother smiled slightly and did not answer the question. He turned around and left the small Taoist temple. Walking out of the general's mansion, Ning Ke noticed the spies who were hiding in the streets but did not deliberately cover their tracks. He knew that many bigwigs in the imperial court were concerned about the story between him and Xiaoho. After a moment of silence, he walked down the stone steps and gently patted the big black horse's head. During this period of time, he had many things to do and needed a more convenient means of transportation. The iron horse carriage left by his teacher Yen Sei could not be as light as a feather because his state was not high enough. An ordinary horse could not pull it at all, so he brought the big black horse out from the back of the mountain of the academy. The big black horse obviously did not feel proud and moved because the carriage behind it was too heavy. Compared to this, it would rather continue to be bullied by the wooden fish in the academy. The completely black horse carriage drove to the Yanming Lake. Ning Ke sat in the carriage, leaning against the back of the carriage and resting with his eyes closed. He looked a little tired. Earlier in the autumn garden of the general's estate, he'd sat across from Xiaoho and discussed the Tao. They talked about the stories of the past and the gratitude and grudges between them. Even though they hadn't made it clear, it had tempered and tested his mind. There was a faint fragrance of osmanthus outside the carriage window. He thought that it was the osmanthus in the He family's mansion, and it had actually bloomed at this time. At this moment, something in his arms suddenly warmed up. The heat spread through the black academy uniform into the air in the carriage, making the fragrance of the osmanthus even stronger. Ning Ke opened his eyes and reached into his arms to take out the arrai pestle tightly wrapped in cloth. He felt the clear heat coming from his palms and slowly raised his eyebrows with a solemn expression. After entering the palace to study and meditate, he now had a deep understanding of the big tactical array of Chang'an City. Although he was still far from the state and means of his master Yen Sei, his mind had gradually connected with Chang'an City, and he could perceive everything this magnificent city wanted to tell him. Ning Ke sensed that a peerless powerhouse had entered Chang'an. At this moment, it was the moment when Yi Su entered Chang'an with the grain team from other counties. Ning Ke did not know that the powerhouse who had come to Chang'an was Yi Su. He only knew that the other party was very strong, so strong that the arrai pestle began to slightly heat up. He could not help but have a very strong sense of vigilance in his eyes. He said to the black horse in front of the carriage, "Turn around and go to the academy." Ning Ke turned to the academy because he was very clear that with his state and strength, he could not deal with the powerhouse who had come to Chang'an. In addition, in fact, he also used this as an excuse to ask his teacher some questions. Some questions that the academy had never discussed but had always been like firewood in his heart. After entering the back of the mountain of the academy, Ning Ke heard the sound of the waterfall and came to the hut. Ning Ke did not see the headmaster. It was obvious that the headmaster did not want to answer his questions, so he did not want to see him. Then he left the hut, bypassed the waterfall and came to the precipice. He slowly walked along the steep stone path hidden in the precipice and returned to the cliff cave where he had lived for 3 months. The wisteria on the roofed corridor had long withered. The wisteria fruits were not stewed by Sang Sang, but became food for the ants on the ground. Standing on the edge of the cliff, Ning Ke looked at the sea of clouds in front of him and Chang and on the other side of the sea of clouds. He was silent for a long time, analyzing the headmaster's attitude by avoiding to see him. After an unknown period of time, eldest brother walked to his side and looked at the distant Chang'an city. He said, "The person who came is Yi Su." Ning Ke had already felt that the person who entered Chang'an city was a peerless powerhouse, so he was not surprised to hear Yi Su's name. Eldest brother looked at him and suddenly said, "Everything in the past, such as yesterday's death." Ning Ke knew that eldest brother was trying to persuade him. He did not want to say anything, but when he looked at the distant Chang'an city shrouded in the autumn sunshine, he suddenly had the idea to say something. "But I did not die yesterday. They all died." Between the precipice, the autumn wind blew and the clouds moved. The silver thread-like waterfalls between the precipice became thinner than in spring because of the decreasing water volume. Eldest brother looked at the waterfall between the precipice and said, "If a person is blinded by hatred, then he will not be able to see the wider world and the more beautiful scenery." Ning Ke said, "Hatred cannot blind one's eyes. It can only make one's eyes red. For me, hatred has already become my eyes. All these years I have not seen anything else. Revenge is my world and my most beautiful scenery." Eldest brother said, "Is it really worth living such an uncomfortable life?" Ning Ke turned to look at him and said, "Senior brother, you are wrong. People want to live freely, they should not think too much. They should do whatever they want to do. That is true freedom." In this state of mind I still wrote it. Speechlessly and bitterly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 462. Standing on the edge of the cliff and looking at the clouds, Ning Ke rarely said such serious words. At first, he hesitated because he was talking to the eldest brother, but then it became smoother and smoother. What others don't want me to do, what the law of the Tang Empire forbids me to do, and what morality forbids me to do, does it have anything to do with me? The eldest brother shook his head and said, "But there is no absolute freedom in the world. Everything, even the spirit, has its limits. If your freedom interferes with the freedom of others or even the whole world is not free, then no one will let you be free." Ning Ke said, "But you should have as much as you can." The eldest brother was puzzled and asked, "Why do you have to have more?" Ning Ke said, "These things are no different from silver. They are all good things. Since they are good things, of course the more the better. I don't believe in the saying that it is better to have nothing than to have too much." The eldest brother said, "But it requires absolute power. If you want to have the whole world, you need to have the power to match it. I have never seen such a person in my life." Ning Ke said, "Senior brother, you are right. That is why we cultivate and why we become stronger." The eldest brother's voice was slightly bitter and he said helplessly, "That is not what I mean." Ning Ke said with a smile, "Although we can't achieve it, we must yearn for it." The eldest brother looked at him and said, "You want to have absolute freedom, but you don't have the power to match it. That is why you came back to the academy today. Do you want to see the headmaster?" Ning Ke looked at the clouds on the edge of the cliff and said, "I don't know what I will ask the headmaster if I see him. But since the headmaster doesn't want to see me, I have to think about these questions myself." Eldest brother thought of what Yi Su had said in front of the small Taoist temple in Chang'an. He also thought of the black line in the past. He looked at Ning Ke's thoughtful face and could not help but sigh softly. He felt that the mountain wind passing through the cliffs suddenly became a little cold. Different people have different freedom. Once these freedoms conflict with each other, there will be disputes. The law of the Tang Empire or the West Hill scriptures are the rules to solve these disputes. He looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, "The Academy believes that the law of the Tang Empire is the most important thing in order to prevent the world from falling into chaos. No one can violate it, not even me. And as a disciple of the Academy, I will take the initiative to maintain the dignity of the law of the Tang Empire. I hope you can clearly understand this." Ning Ke was not surprised to hear eldest brother's warning and nodded. Eldest brother looked at him and suddenly asked curiously, "What are you going to do next?" Ning Ke was silent for a long time and then said, "I don't know either." Eldest senior brother asked in confusion, "Then what junior brother said to me earlier?" Ning Ke turned to look at him and said, "Senior brother, I didn't say those words to ask for your consent or help. I just want to say that your idea is wrong." Eldest brother stared at him blankly for a long time, and then sighed with emotion. "Youngest brother, you are indeed better than me, better than Jun Emong." Suddenly, a thin and long shadow appeared on the precipice. No one knew when second brother came here. He stepped on the wisteria that was about to rot on the ground and walked to the two people on the precipice. He looked at Ning Ke with a stern expression and said, "Younger brother, you are right. The most important meaning of life is not victory but fighting. So if you want to fight, then fight." Ning Ke looked at him and suddenly laughed. He said, "Second brother, you are also wrong." Eldest brother and second brother were stunned at the same time. They thought that youngest brother was indeed extraordinary and dared to point out the two senior brothers' mistakes at the same time. It should be known that no one in the back of the mountain of the academy had dared to do so over the years. Ning Ke said calmly, "The most important meaning of life is not to fight." Second brother frowned and said, "Then what is it?" Ning Ke said, "It is to fight and then win." Standing at the edge of the precipice, looking at the fading figure on the precipice and the corner of the black academy uniform blown by the autumn wind, Mr. First and Mr. Second, the most powerful people in the back of the mountain of the academy, were silent for a long time, as if they were still thinking about Ning Ke's previous words and the hidden attitude in them. Second brother sighed and said, "Everyone thinks that youngest brother has the lowest state in the academy. But now it seems that his state is actually higher than ours." The state mentioned here did not refer to the state of cultivation, but the state of mind. The headmaster of the academy walked out of the cliff cave. Eldest brother and second brother stood on both sides and bowed respectfully. The headmaster of the academy walked to the edge of the cliff and watched Ning Ke walk down the stone path and disappear into the narrow gorge. His two white eyebrows slowly floated up and he smiled slightly, as if he was very satisfied with his youngest disciple. Eldest brother asked in distress, "Teacher, can hatred really not be eliminated?" The headmaster said, "Strong emotions such as love and hatred are the difference between human beings and beasts. It is the key to prove that one is a human being. If one can even get rid of these, what difference is there between him and beast? People often say that those who do not hate lightly are usually ungrateful. This is the truth." "Silly boy, there is no way to eliminate this feeling and this hatred will never end. How can it be so easily erased? The most important question is, why do we want to eliminate it?" The headmaster of the academy's words still could not help eldest brother get rid of this lost emotion. After he left the small town, he had been living in the back of the mountain of the academy. When he traveled around the world he served the headmaster. Occasionally he traveled alone and had his own tasks. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that he had no real experience in the world of mortals. Eldest brother sighed and said, "But when will revenge ever end?" The headmaster of the academy frowned slightly and said unhappily, "I told you long ago not to read those useless, boring, tasteless and shameless scriptures of Buddhism. Now it seems that you are really confused." Eldest brother smiled bitterly, but in his heart, he thought that those scriptures were indeed interesting. The headmaster of the academy said, "Junimo, explain to your senior brother when will revenge ever end, lest he burrows into the pile of old books again and can't climb out for 3 or 4 years. Second brother answered in a low voice and looked at eldest brother seriously. He said, "Senior brother, if you don't want revenge to ever end, then you should kill all your enemies and cut the weeds at the roots. In this way there will only be a few ghosts left in the world who can't take revenge, and the story of hatred will end here." This simple and plain words did not move eldest brother, but made him smile bitterly. He thought that such a method sounded like a villain and should not come from the academy. Second brother did not dare to guess eldest brother's mood at this time. He turned to look at the headmaster of the academy and said calmly, "Teacher, since youngest brother can't find evidence that Xiaoho violated the law of the Tang Empire, what will he do?" The autumn wind blew on the headmaster's black robe. He looked at the distant Chang'an city and said with a smile, "I don't know either, but Ning Ke will probably give us a surprise. 2 years ago the Tang censor Zhang Ichi died mysteriously outside the House of Red Sleeves. At that time it did not attract much attention. After the censor's wife's crying was suppressed by the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an city Shengguan Yangyu, the case was closed. It was not until Lin Ling, the psyche master of the northern army of the Tang Empire, sneaked into Chang'an city to investigate and found the iron nail in the censor's body that the case was rediscovered by some bigwigs. Later, with the death of Chen Zixin, Yan Suqing and others, especially Gu Shi's death in Tiang City, and the death of Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu on the rainy street, the Tang Empire's military and many forces began to suspect Ning Quebec. However, just like His Majesty could not punish Xiaoho many years ago, no one dared to accuse this student of the second floor of the academy and the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy without evidence. Just because there was no evidence, it did not mean that it was not true. The rumors about Ning Kei's identity had spread among the upper class of Chang'an City, even out of the country. Many people firmly believed that he was the son of Lin Guangyuan, the Shenwei general who died tragically because of treason. Therefore, many people were guessing what Xiahou would do when he was about to retire and return to Chang and to take revenge after enduring for so many years. The old minister of offerings from a prominent family in Qinghe County came and hid in the censor's mansion. He squinted his deep and old eyes, calmly and attentively watching the direction of the wind in Chang'an City, guessing what might have happened. The Tang Empire's military was vigilantly watching the movements by the Yanming Lake. General Su Shi stood on the small building and looked indifferently at Chang'an City. As long as there was any unusual movement, he would not care about the academy and would directly send powerful cavalry to capture or kill Ning Kei, because he was above the law of the Tang Empire. The people in the palace were also watching and guessing. Even Yi Su, the successor of the Jishou Abbey, came to Chang'an City. These bigwigs all had rare wisdom and strategies in the world. They had terrifying intelligence sources and subordinates. However, even they could not predict Ning Kei's next step. Although Ning Kei's state had improved by leaps and bounds and he was already at the peak of the see-through state, he was still weak compared to General Xiahou, who was at the peak state of martial arts. Therefore he could not assassinate him. No one had ever been able to find Xiahou's crimes and evidence. When those who had participated in the incident died one by one in Ning Kei's hands, it was even more hopeless for him to reverse the verdict for the Shenwei general's mansion and use the law of the Tang Empire to bring Xiahou down. The most important problem was that both the emperor and the academy were willing to see Xiahou retire peacefully. Even if they did not stop Ning Kei, they would definitely not help him. The dangers in Jianghu could not touch Xiahou's clothes, and the plots in the court could not touch Xiahou's indifferent expression. Ning Kei could not assassinate Xiahou, so what could he do? After countless calculations including the reactions of the academy, the imperial court and the West Hill, the bigwigs in Chang'an City finally came to a conclusion that made them feel at ease. Ning Kei could do nothing. At least in this winter. It was still late autumn and the cold winter had not arrived. General Xiahou would leave the imperial court in the middle of winter. Ning Kei cultivated silently by the Yanming Lake, waiting for the arrival of winter. One day the yellow leaves fell like rain. Ning Kei sat under a balding tree, and his knees were full of withered leaves. Yi Hongyu put down the scroll in her hand and looked at him. She said, "Even if you hide the fact that you have joined the devil until the end and turn it into a trump card, you can only scare Xiahou and not kill him." Ning Kei looked at her and said, "I don't know what you were talking about. Fight and then win. You can change victory to victory." This was Lin Hai's original words. He posted it on Weibo. I liked it very much, so I stole it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 463. Since it was not a human language, he naturally could not understand it. Although Yi Hongyu spoke with a southern accent, it was a standard Central Plains language. Ning Kei said that she was talking nonsense. It was not that he could not understand it, but he had to pretend not to understand it at this moment. He looked calm and even had a hint of doubt. But in fact, after hearing about joining the devil, his body had become as stiff as a block of wood. His heart seemed to have stopped beating. Yi Hongyu closed the book on the table so that the autumn wind would not disturb the paper sword in the book. She looked at him sitting under the tree and said, "If you become an actor, you can also earn money." Ning Kei felt that she was very boring and waved his hand to ignore her. Yi Hongyu picked up the book and walked to the tree. She looked at him and said, "You and I have fought so many times in the house by the lake. Do you think that I can't tell the difference between the aura of heaven and earth condensed on the surface of a martial arts powerhouse and the genuine qi in the body of the remnants of the devil's doctrine? Do you really think that I will believe that you really cultivated talisman and martial arts in the cliff cave of the academy in the spring? Or do you think that I am an idiot?" The Tao addict was naturally not an idiot. At this point there was no point in pretending not to understand. Ning Kei remembered that the headmaster had once told him that youngest uncle had never let the enemy's weapon touch his clothes after joining the devil. He could not help but mock himself and think that his state was indeed too low. He raised his head and looked at Yi Hongyu. He said, "Even if you have guessed something, you should know that I will not admit anything. So there is no point in trying to test me with words." Yi Hongyu said, "I just don't understand. During the second half of the trip to the wilderness, you were always in my sight. When did you pick up the cultivation method of the devil's doctrine?" She looked down at him and continued expressionlessly, "What I want to know is, Where did the devil's doctrine genuine qi in your body come from? Master Lotus, or Mr. Ko? Ning Ke shook his head and said, I don't understand what you are saying. Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and said, why are you still pretending at this point? Ning Ke said, there are some things that need to be pretended until the end. Although you have been expelled from the West Hill Divine Palace, you have said that you will dedicate your life to Haotian. So why do you think that I will be stupid enough to admit anything in front of you and be remembered by you? Yi Hongyu looked at him and said sarcastically, are you afraid? Ning Ke said, although I haven't seen much about the West Hill Divine Palace's attitude towards the remnants of the devil's doctrine, especially the horrible means of the judicial department, I know a lot about it. Yi Hongyu smiled mockingly and said, I didn't know that a disciple of the academy like you would be so timid. Without any evidence, as long as the headmaster of the academy is alive, who can do anything to you? Of course I understand. In this world, power always speaks. When youngest uncle traveled the world, the West Hill Divine Palace did not even dare to let out a fart. This is the reason. Ning Ke said, I am much weaker than youngest uncle. But as long as Haotian Taoism cannot suppress the academy, the headmaster of the academy will still exist in this world. No matter what you know, you can only pretend that you don't know, just like what I am doing now. Because no one can bear the consequences of the truth being exposed. Then he smiled and continued, but don't expect the current state of the world to tempt me to admit anything. Since the headmaster of the academy is not dead, the West Hill Divine Palace cannot do anything to me. There is no need for me to get into trouble. Yi Hongyu said, but I already know about this. When the headmaster of the academy dies, I will immediately prove to the world that you have joined the devil and then kill you. Since we first met in the wilderness, you have always said that you want to kill me. But you have never done so. Instead, you need my help now. So don't say such things in the future. Just do it directly. Ning Ke looked at her and said, there is another thing that I have a completely different view from you. I don't think that the headmaster will die before me, so you will never be able to prove it. Hearing this, Yi Hongyu was deep in thought and kept silent for a long time. Ning Ke stood up and brushed off the fallen leaves on his body. He walked out of the plum garden. When he reached the stone gate of the plum garden, he suddenly stopped and said, your brother has come to Chang'an. Yi Hongyu was speechless. She looked at his back and said in disbelief, he has not entered the Tang Empire all these years. Why would he suddenly come to Chang'an? You ask me, but who should I ask? Ning Ke said. Yi Hongyu suddenly raised her eyebrows and looked at him with hidden anger. She said, why did you only tell me now? Ning Ke turned around and looked at her. He said, I am now the master of Chang'an. Mr. Yisu is a guest and you are also a guest. There is no need for me to tell a guest that there is a new guest in this city. Even if you are brother and sister, it is my duty not to tell you. The reason why I am willing to tell you now is to make you happy. It is a kind of bribe. Yi Hongyu said with slight mockery, bribe me not to tell the West Hill that you have joined the devil? Ning Ke said seriously, why do you have to think of people as so ugly? Even if you have guessed something and tell the West Hill, what can you do to me without evidence? Yi Hongyu looked at his serious expression and could not help but be startled. She said, then why did you bribe me? Ning Ke asked, it is not against the rules for a talisman master to have a martial cultivator as his servant, even in a challenge? Yi Hongyu nodded and said, this is the rule of the cultivation world. Ning Ke looked at her and said very seriously, then are you willing to be my servant and accompany me to kill Xiahou? You know, that general is really not good. He did not wait for the word killed to come out of his mouth. Yi Hongyu opened the scroll in the book and touched the small paper sword with her fingers. We are just discussing. Why are you so angry? Ning Ke pretended to be calm and said. Then he hurried out of the plum garden like a frightened dog. Chang'an was a very majestic city. The golden wind and drizzle in the south would be clear here, and the cold wind and snow in the north would be gentle here. Those who were low and self-abased elsewhere would be confident here, and those who were arrogant elsewhere would often become quiet and peaceful here. The great divine priest of light who left Peach Mountain worked in a shop in this city for half a year. Yi Su, the successor of Jishou Abbey, began to preach in a small Taoist temple. In the small Taoist temple, no one knew Yi Su's identity. The skinny Taoist who presided over the Taoist temple still remembered the scene of his failure that day and did not want to take him in at all. However, Yi Su took out the Taoist book approved by the West Hill Divine Palace, and the skinny Taoist could not find any reason to refuse him to stay here. He did not need to pay for a room in the Taoist temple, but Yi Su did not want to live like this. He calmly and undeniably took over the preaching work of the small Taoist temple. He left the Taoist temple early the next morning and distributed leaflets in the surrounding streets and alleys, summoning the neighbors to listen to him preach the true meaning of Haotian Taoism. Standing on the stone steps, Yisu began his work. His description of the West Hill scriptures was very clear, but also very boring. Words such as Haotian, equality, benevolence, and blessings appeared from time to time. However, there were very few people in the neighborhood and they left very quickly. In the autumn afternoon, the door of the small Taoist temple was extremely deserted. A few sparrows paced under the stone steps, looking for food with their heads lowered. They wanted to survive the upcoming winter that was destined to be unbearable. They did not even notice that there was someone standing on the stone steps, so they did not show any fear. Yisu looked down at the sparrows under the stone steps and felt a little confused. Why did the people of Chang and not care about the preaching of Haotian Taoism? Then he felt a lot of contempt in his heart. This was indeed a country of non-believers. They could not even understand the teachings that he preached. The skinny Taoist walked out with a bowl of noodles. Looking at Yisu's expression, he sighed and said, "Although I don't really understand, I can roughly guess that you must have learned in the West Hill. You might have even gone to the Revelation Institute to study. However, preaching is not easy, so you don't have to feel guilty." Yisu said expressionlessly, "I don't feel guilty for not playing the lute to a cow." The skinny Taoist gradually became familiar with him and no longer felt inexplicable awe when he saw the Taoist bun on Yisu's head. He laughed and said, "You can't force a cow to drink water. You have to think of some ways." Yisu frowned slightly and said, "What right do these people have to trouble me?" The skinny Taoist said seriously, "All the people in the world are the people of Haotian Taoism. They should all feel the warmth of Haotian Taoism. Thousands of years ago, the ancestors of Haotian Taoism preached in the wilderness and went through many hardships. Do they also have to see if the other party is qualified when they preach?" Yisu looked at this ordinary-looking Taoist and suddenly felt that this person's expression was more determined than that of the West Hill divine priests. He could not help but be slightly startled. After a long silence, he said, "I have learned." The skinny Taoist smiled and said, "Do you want to learn how to preach?" Haotian Taoism spread in all the countries in the world. The Taoist temples did not need to spend much effort at all. All the people were born as believers of the West Hill Divine Palace. Yisu had traveled around all the countries and had seen this for more than 10 years. That was why he encountered great difficulties in preaching in the neighborhood. He could not help but feel angry and confused. He frowned and said, "Do we have to pay attention to the method of preaching?" The skinny Taoist said, "According to the usual method, we will usually distribute food or wine after the preaching. When there is a festival, we will organize a gathering for the neighborhood. If we have enough funds, we will invite 2 singers from the musical house to sing Taoist songs. The effect will definitely be the best." Hearing this, Yisu flew into a rage and rebuked sternly, "Ridiculous. Preaching is such a sacred thing. How can it be turned into an exchange of benefits? How can such believers be pious?" The skinny Taoist looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot and said, "Haotian has given everything to the human world. This is the reward for us. That is why we believe in Haotian. Isn't this a natural thing? Why are you so agitated? If there is no benefit at all, who will believe in the religion? God loves the world. I often have a headache." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 464. Yisu had been cultivating in the Jisho Abbey since he was a child. After that, he traveled around many countries and saw that Haotian Taoism was highly respected. He always thought that it was natural and never thought that faith could be understood in such a way. He wanted to kill this blasphemous Taoist with one slap. However, he suddenly thought that although the skinny Taoist's words were unpleasant, he could not find anything wrong with them if he thought about it carefully. So he kept silent for a long time. The sparrows at the bottom of the stone steps woke up because of the stifling atmosphere. They chirped twice, flapped their wings, and ran away to hide in the shadows of the autumn trees. Yisu woke up from his silence and looked at the skinny Taoist expressionlessly. He said, "Please continue." The skinny Taoist looked at him and smiled. He said, "In fact, at least 90% of the Tangs are believers of Haotian Taoism. However, they are different from the believers in the South Jin Kingdom and the Kingdom of Song. They do not have the patience to participate in missionary activities. Therefore, if you want to strengthen their faith in Haotian, missionary activities are not the best way." Yisu said, "Then what method should I use?" The skinny Taoist said, "The people of Haotian Taoism value morality, so they pay attention to the consistency of their words and actions. However, for missionary activities, words are never as good as actions. As the master of the abbey, if you can get close to your neighbors and take the initiative to help them when they are in trouble, such as carrying water and drying food for them, then through your daily words and actions, you can show Haotian's kindness and love. This is the most effective way to teach the Tangs. Yisu was deep in thought. The skinny Taoist patted his shoulder with his empty hand and said, "Other than the great divine priest of West Hill, not many people can witness Haotian's miracles. Ordinary Taoists like us are the representatives of Haotian in the world. If ordinary people want to feel Haotian, they have to feel us." Yisu was enlightened and said, "That makes sense." The skinny Taoist sighed and said, "It has been 23 years since I left West Hill. Although the Tang Empire is not as glorious as other countries, I am happy to guard this small Taoist temple. I heard that in other countries, the Taoists are tyrannical and the envoys sent by the Divine Hall are even more arrogant and extravagant. How can people truly respect Haotian? The only thing left is fear. Those Taoists are not the representatives of Haotian, they are the shame of Haotian." Yisu did not want to discuss the affairs of Haotian Taoism in the secular world. He looked at the bowl of noodles in his hand and said, "If you don't eat, the noodles will get cold." Only then did the skinny Taoist remember that he had a bowl of noodles in his hand. He quickly handed it to him and said, "This is for you. If you don't eat your fill, you won't have the strength to preach." Yisu quietly looked at the bowl of noodles in his hand and suddenly said, "I'll try your method." A drop of rain suddenly fell into the bowl of noodle soup. Yisu and the skinny Taoist looked up and saw raindrops falling from the sky. An autumn rain fell without warning. The late autumn rain was out of everyone's expectations. The intensity of the rain was even more rare. Some of the neighbors next to the small Taoist temple thought that the rainy season was over, so they didn't repair their roofs. The sudden attack of the rain caused the roof to leak. After eating the noodles, the autumn rain gradually stopped. The skinny Taoist brought Yisu and two little Taoist boys to the street and began to help the neighbors to drain the water and repair the roof. Yisu had done many things, such as freezing the world with a sword, laughing at the messengers of the underworld in his life, and ignoring all the trifles of the secular world above the clouds. However, he had never repaired the roof damaged by the autumn rain. So when he climbed up the stairs to the roof and began to clean and replace the black tiles, his movement seemed a little clumsy. However, he was after all the first person in the younger generation of Haotian Taoism. His sister Yi Hongyu, whom he ignored indifferently, was known as the Tao addict in the West Hill Divine Palace. So he became more and more skilled in removing the tiles and wiping the oars, and his speed became faster and faster. The neighbors below the wooden ladder who were responsible for helping him changed from 1 to 4, but they still couldn't keep up with his speed. Gradually, in the streets after the autumn rain, people subconsciously surrounded him. They looked at the flying tiles on the street and watched him smear the mortar like he was painting mountains and rivers. They let out exclamations from time to time. Hearing the exclamations from time to time in the streets, Yisu's face was expressionless. He didn't feel proud because this kind of thing wasn't difficult at all. He only calmly and silently removed the tiles and smeared the mortar. He just did it casually, just like what he did in the past. The puddles on the street evaporated into steam by the autumn sun, shrouding the houses. The trees that had lost most of their leaves dozed off in boredom by the street. People looked at the secular Taoist from the small Taoist temple on the eaves and enjoyed the scene in front of them, so they didn't notice the scene on the street. A plump figure walked out of the water vapor formed by the rainwater. Chin Pippi walked along the stone street, stepping on the rainwater, and walked to the periphery of the crowd. He looked up and squinted at the figure on the eaves. It didn't take long for him to recognize the person's face. His originally half-squinted eyes suddenly opened wide, the rims of his eyes red, and tears flowed down. He looked at Yisu on the roof and shouted in a trembling voice, "Senior brother." Yisu was on the roof, using bamboo ropes to tie some wooden sticks that had been separated from the eaves. Hearing the voice from outside the crowd below, he slowly turned his head. He looked at the fat young man outside the crowd, and an extremely sincere smile appeared on his usually emotionless face. He said happily, "You've come?" Chin Pippi looked at Yisu on the roof and said with tears streaming down his face, "Senior brother, what happened to you? Have you also been expelled from Taoism? Is that person really so cruel?" Yisu's expression was slightly stiff, as if he had become a gecko on the roof that had been dried by the sun. Chin Pippi was still sad, looking at him with tears streaming down his face. Then he noticed that senior brother Yisu's left foot on the wooden ladder didn't seem to touch the surface of the ladder at all. Then he noticed that the clear sunlight after the rain sprinkled on Yisu's light white robe, emitting a very faint and clean luster, like the luster of jade. Chin Pippi then realized that senior brother's state was much higher than when he was in the temple. What shocked him even more was that senior brother was in some kind of turning point at this moment. The small Taoist temple was facing the street, with an archway and eaves, and there was a shadow in the sunlight after the rain. The two stood in the shadow. Yisu looked at Chin Pippi's round face and let out a sigh in his heart. Chin Pippi looked at the faint luster on senior brother's body, suppressing the shock and fear in his heart, and said in a trembling voice, "Senior brother, what medicine did you take to get into such a situation?" "I have been keeping the heavenly power pill. If you really want to try to break the realm, you must tell me first, don't eat it blindly." In the path of cultivation, the further one went, the more difficult it would be. Just like climbing a dangerous peak, the last few steps were always the most difficult distance. As the successor of Jisho Abbey, Yisu had already walked to the deepest part of the path of cultivation more than 10 years ago. It was easier said than done to go further on this foundation. So when Chin Pippi looked at Yisu on the roof, who was stepping on the wooden ladder as if he was stepping on flowing clouds, and his robe was faintly shining, he thought that Yisu must have taken a shortcut. Of course, Yisu did not take medicine, not even the most precious pills of Jisho Abbey. Because since the beginning of cultivation, he had always believed that once a cultivator relied on the assistance of external forces, then he would never have a chance to reach the real shore in his life. It was not until Chin Pippi said it twice in a row that he realized something was wrong. Standing in the shadow of the small Taoist temple, Yisu silently looked at the houses and markets near and far. He silently felt his Taoist heart, and found that his state, which had been rigid for more than 10 years, actually trembled and a crack appeared. He could not help but be shocked speechless. Chang'an was indeed not an ordinary city. At this moment, the nameless small Taoist temple welcomed another guest. This guest was a young girl in a green Taoist robe. Yi Hongyu looked at her brother on the stone steps, and her body trembled uncontrollably. Then her eyes turned red, and 2 streaks of tears flowed down her beautiful face silently. Yisu looked at his sister under the stone steps and frowned slightly. He said with some disgust, "Why are you crying?" Yi Hongyu's clear eyes overflowed with more tears, but she did not reach out to wipe them away. Instead, she looked at him stubbornly and discontentedly and said, "When he cries, you are moved. When I cry, you scold me." Yisu's frown deepened a little. The only thing that could compare to Hao Yin's divine light was a human's vision, which could focus on one point and illuminate the world she wanted to see. Yi Hongyu looked at her brother with grievance and stubbornness, like a little girl who was scolded by her brother for stealing her roasted sweet potato. Her gaze fell on Chin Pippi, full of hatred. Chin Pippi lowered his head even more obediently. Yisu looked at her coldly and said, "Who are you? How dare you stare at my younger brother so rudely? If you do this again, I will dig your eyes out." Yi Hongyu did not seem to hear what he said. She still looked at Chin Pippi with hatred as if she was looking at a dead man. However, her eyes were not dug out because Chin Pippi, who was extremely guilty, spoke at the right time and dissolved the awkwardness in front of the stone steps of the small Taoist temple. Yisu looked at Chin Pippi and said with a smile, "I haven't seen my teacher for some time. I think he should still be in the South Sea. As for why I came to Chang'an, there is naturally another reason." Chin Pippi asked curiously, "Senior brother, what reason?" Yisu said, "I came to see Xiaoho." After a short pause, he looked at Chin Pippi and said calmly, "And also to see Ning Quebec. He was the successor of Jisho Abbey and a world wayfarer of Hao Yin Taoism. Now he did not cultivate outside the world, but stepped into the mortal world and came to Chang'an for such a simple reason. If the rumor was true, if Ning Ke was really the son of Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan, then he was very likely to be the son of Yama that the divine priest of light had mentioned. Although Hao Yin Taoism denied the divine priest of light's opinion more than a decade ago, and the bloody storm did not last until the end, Yisu did not believe it. Because he was on the other side of the black line that year when the omen appeared. A friend has come from afar. I want to receive him. I hope I can drink happily. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 465. Yisu said to Chin Pippi, "I came to Chang'an to cultivate in the human realm. It is better not to see each other. But if you really want to come, then come." Chin Pippi asked, "Senior brother, when will you return to the temple?" Yisu frowned slightly, not because there was anything wrong with the question, but because it reminded him of the most troublesome problem of Haotian Taoism in the past decade. He looked at Chin Pippi and scolded him coldly, "Then when will you go back?" Chin Pippi was speechless and said awkwardly, "I have to ask my teacher." "Then go ahead." Yisu looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Tell me when you have the answer." Chin Pippi was chased out of the small Taoist temple. Yisu waved his sleeves and walked into the temple. Yi Hongyu followed behind him quietly. Even though she had just been scolded, she still could not suppress the joy and mockery on her face. Her smile did not disappear even when she walked into the room. Yisu walked to the window and sat down. He looked back at her and frowned slightly as if he was unhappy. Yi Hongyu stopped smiling and looked at her brother stubbornly and calmly. She did not want to leave. To her surprise, Yisu did not reprimand her. Instead, he said indifferently, "Leaving Peach Mountain might be a little less resolute, but it is a good choice. The great divine priest of judgment is an idiot who has been soaked in the dirty water of the secluded prison. We cannot tolerate him, let alone bow our heads." Yi Hongyu said quietly, "I understand." Yisu looked at her peaceful expression and said after a long silence, "I hope you can be stronger than me in the future, but you need to prove it yourself." Yi Hongyu pursed her lips and said, "I will prove it to my brother." Yisu seemed to be satisfied with her answer and nodded. "Pippi will become the master of Haotian Taoism in the future. He needs the help of a true powerhouse. I believe you will not disappoint me." Hearing this, Yi Hongyu pursed her lips even tighter and lowered her head, refusing to respond. Because of her silence, Yisu slowly raised his eyebrows like two emotionless Taoist swords. He said coldly, "Don't think that I don't know what you are trying to do when you secretly provoked my younger brother to leave the temple." Yi Hongyu looked up at him expressionlessly and said, "Haotian Taoism should have been yours." Yisu's voice was as cold as ice. "Say that again? So what if I say it 10,000 times? Brother, you are the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism. You will definitely become a saint. Haotian Taoism is destined to be passed on to you." Yi Hongyu said stubbornly, "And I didn't say or do anything back then. I only told him that as long as he stayed in Haotian Taoism, the Abbey Dean would definitely pass on Haotian Taoism to him." Yisu scolded sternly, "Pippi was still a child at that time. How could you say such things to him? This is the truth. Can't a child accept the truth?" Yi Hongyu said, "I was also a child then. I knew the truth. I really could not accept the truth, so I wanted to change something." Chin Pippi also knew that this was the truth, so he felt guilty. He felt that he had let you down. That was why he would never be able to defeat me. That was why he fled the Jisho Abbey after I said those words. Her voice was very calm and her narration was very clear. Although what she talked about was related to the most important matter of Haotian Taoism's future, she did not show any fear. The expression on Yisu's face became more and more strange. It was not anger but calmness to the extreme. Even his voice was extremely calm. Have you ever thought about the reason for his guilt? This voice was not the frozen surface of the lake, but the quiet water in a deep well. Younger brother felt guilty because he was kind. He respected and loved me, but he found out that master had decided to pass on Haotian Taoism to him. That was why he was sad and left. Yisu looked at his sister expressionlessly and said, "You knew what he would do if you said that, but you still said it. You were taking advantage of his kindness and respect for me." Yi Hongyu said expressionlessly, "So what?" "Nothing." Yisu slowly raised his right hand. His white robe that was stained with rainwater and mud slid down his arm. He slapped Yi Hongyu's head with his palm. Yi Hongyu did not close her eyes. She stubbornly opened them and looked at her brother in front of her. Looking at the falling palm, there was only calmness in her bright eyes. Yisu's heart softened a little. The pity that he had forcibly erased in his heart reappeared. His palm gradually slowed down and finally fell weakly on the desk in front of the window. He let out a sigh. The sigh was filled with helplessness, regret, and guilt towards Haotian Taoism. Yisu's palm fell on the desk and trembled slightly. It seemed to be powerless, but in fact, it contained the cultivation and state of this peerless powerhouse of Haotian Taoism. With this disappointed sigh, countless cracks suddenly appeared on the desk. Then the cracks spread to the legs of the desk. Cracks also appeared on the bluestone floor, followed by the corner of the wall. The cracks climbed up the wall, and the bright paper of the window also began to crack. In the end, the cracks reached the beams. The desk broke into hundreds of small wooden pieces and fell to the ground. The legs of the desk broke into even thinner pieces and fell to the ground. The cracks on the bluestone floor deepened, like a black abyss. The skin of the wall peeled off, the paper of the window floated away, and the beams squeaked and then broke in the middle. The desk collapsed. The ground cracked. The wall collapsed. The beam broke. In the loud crash, the remote house of the Taoist temple collapsed like a building block. Smoke and dust filled the air. The cracks continued to spread outwards and cut the rest of the buildings of the Taoist temple into pieces. The entire building of the small Taoist temple collapsed one after another in the smoke and dust. Fortunately, the lines of cracks that destroyed the walls and beams were extremely magical. They cut the hard and heavy building materials into pieces and collapsed according to some mysterious law of space cutting. Therefore, the people in the house were not smashed to death. The air after the rain was originally very fresh, but at this moment the small Taoist temple was covered in smoke and dust. The skinny Taoist and 2 Taoist children were covered in dust. They climbed out of the ruins in an extremely pathetic manner. They covered their noses with their sleeves and coughed continuously. They looked extremely miserable. Yisu stood quietly among the bricks and wood. Dust and debris surrounded him, but his eyebrows and clothes were still so clean without a speck of dust. When he was willing, he could climb the ladder, remove the tiles, and fix the eaves. He could be covered in rain and mud. When he was unwilling, even if the sky was filled with mud, it would not be able to touch a corner of his clothes. After all, you are my sister. Don't force me to kill you. Yisu looked at Yi Hongyu and said calmly, if you insist on standing in front of me with this stubborn attitude, I really don't know what will happen next. Yi Hongyu wiped away the tears and dirt on her face. She looked at him and said hatefully, brother, one day I will be stronger than you. When that time comes, you will no longer be able to kill me. I will stand in front of you again and insist on taking back what belongs to you. After saying this, she turned around and left the small Taoist temple. Yisu looked at her back as she disappeared outside the monastery. He remained silent. What the hell is going on? The skinny Taoist pounded his chest and stamped his feet in pain. He looked at the small Taoist temple that had turned into ruins in front of him and thought of how he had saved and worked hard for the past few decades. He thought of how he begged everywhere for alms. His body trembled and his voice was filled with despair and sorrow. Yisu frowned slightly and looked back at him. He said, I will pay for you to build another one. Is this about money? Is this about money? The skinny Taoist was filled with grief and anger. He clutched his robe tightly to prevent himself from dying from heartache. He shouted in a hoarse voice, I bought every brick and every piece of wood in this Taoist temple with my own hands. I know where they used to be. But what about now? Now there is nothing left. I have forgotten where they should be. Is this about money? These are my lives. Is that something that money can buy? Yisu looked at the bricks and wood that had been cut into tiny pieces. After a moment of silence, he said, You are right. The newly bought bricks and wood can only build a new Taoist temple. Once the old is destroyed, it cannot be returned. There is no such thing as rebirth in this world. There is only a new life. After saying this, his expression stiffened. He stood in the ruins and did not move anymore. Yisu did not know why this small Taoist temple that had already been reduced to ruins could make him feel such emotions and say such words unconsciously. He only knew that ever since he traveled through many countries and broke through the barrier of life and death, his state had become perfect. His state that was as calm as a mountain showed signs of loosening after the slight tremors earlier. The skinny Taoist did not know his current state. Seeing that he was silent, he thought that he did not want to cause trouble. He could not help but feel even more angry. He wiped away his tears and brought the Taoist child to the ruins, hoping to find something useful. The collapse of the small Taoist temple caused quite a commotion. The neighbors quickly rushed over. Looking at the tragic scene of the ruins, they discussed in low voices and returned to their houses to get tools to help. Many of the neighbors' houses were damaged by the storm. However, they thought of the skinny Taoist's old age and the Taoist child's weak body. How could they care about their own matters? The previously tragic Taoist temple suddenly became a bustling construction site. Although it was impossible to rebuild a Taoist temple in such a short period of time, the loud chants and the laughter of the people seemed to indicate that the small Taoist temple would be restored to its original state in the near future. The skinny Taoist wiped away his tears and bowed in thanks. His face was full of sincere smiles. It was almost dusk. Yisu woke up. He looked at the ordinary figures in front of him who were busy. He looked at the smiles on their faces and thought of the words the skinny Taoist had said. He was deep in thought. The skinny Taoist walked in front of him and glared at him. He wanted to scold him but subconsciously did not dare to. He thought of what the skinny Taoist said when the Taoist temple collapsed and could not help but rub his hands nervously. He asked, "Are you really willing to pay?" Yi Su looked at him and said seriously, "If you are willing, I can build a divine hall for you. Tomorrow is Saturday off. I wish everyone a happy weekend." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 466. At the back of the mountain of the academy. Second brother stood in front of the waterfall, listening to the thunderous sound of water and looking at the splashing mist. After a long silence he said, "I heard that his building collapsed." Eldest brother stood beside him and sighed, "It's his lucky chance that he came to Chang'an. Don't envy him." Second brother slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "Senior brother, why should I envy him?" Chang'an City by the Yanming Lake. There was a big earthen urn on the dining table, in which was a milky white mutton giblet soup. The verdant coriander was smoked by the heat of the mutton soup, and the aroma immediately filled the room. Ning Kei took the chopsticks and used the tips of the chopsticks to break the fermented bean curd in the plate. Sang Sang peeled the garlic and mashed it beside him. The big black horse was in the garden, watching the movement in the room through the doorsill. Its eyes were wide open and its nostrils were wide open. No one knew whether it was curious or greedy for the mutton giblets in the pot. "I heard that the small Taoist temple where Yi Su lived collapsed this afternoon." Ning Kei paused for a moment and couldn't help laughing. He said, "I heard that, after second brother heard about it, he stood in front of the waterfall for a long time and finally smashed his own courtyard." Sang Sang raised her head and looked at him in confusion. She had been to the small courtyard in the back of the mountain of the academy. Thinking that the quiet courtyard had become a ruin, she couldn't help feeling a little pity and asked, "Why?" Ning Kei shook his head and said, "Who knows what second brother and Yi Su are thinking? I often think that people who have cultivated to their state will basically become lunatics." The small Taoist temple collapsed, and Yi Su seemed to understand something. Second brother smashed his own courtyard, maybe he also wanted to understand something? Although Sang Sang had now officially started cultivating, she still couldn't completely understand the thinking of those grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. She thought that young master was right, they were really a group of lunatics. When the mutton giblet soup gradually became cold, the meat gradually disappeared, and the sauce on the plate gradually disappeared, Yi Hongyu finally returned to the Yanming Lake. Sang Sang went to pack her clothes, leaving only Ning Kei in the room. Ning Kei watched her walk in and said, "Why did you come back so late? By the way, although you don't pay the rent, shouldn't you do more housework?" Yi Hongyu looked at the leftovers on the table and said with a frown, "You have maids and stewards." Ning Kei said with a smile, "How can it be as happy as letting the Tao addict wash the dishes and bring water for me? The divine priest of light used to work in my shop. You can learn about the glorious tradition of the West Hill Divine Palace. In the future, when this gets out, it will be a good story for the Ning family." Yi Hongyu frowned even more and sat down without saying a word. Looking at her expression, Ning Kei guessed that she was in a bad mood, but he did not restrain himself and continued, "Speaking of which, I thought your brother would at least treat you to a meal." Yi Hongyu looked at him quietly and said, "It seems that you plan to live a long life in Chang'an. But have you ever thought that the world will not allow you to live like this?" Ning Kei smiled and said, "I am a Tang and a disciple of the second floor of the academy. I can't imagine who would be stupid enough to disturb my life. What if you are the son of Hades?" Yi Hongyu looked at him, her bright eyes full of mockery and coldness. Ning Kei was slightly startled. In the conversation a few days ago, Yi Hongyu directly exposed the fact that he had joined the devil, and now she mentioned such a possible fact so casually. "I really don't know what you are talking about," he said. Yi Hongyu said, "If the rumors are true, and you are the son of the Xianwei general of the Tang Empire, then you are the dark shadow that the divine priest of light saw in the eyes of the divine priest of light. Now, there are probably few people who still remember that incident, but how can I forget it? Do you believe it?" Ning Kei looked into her eyes and asked seriously. Yi Hongyu thought for a while and shook her head. Ning Kei relaxed slightly and said, "Why don't you believe it?" Yi Hongyu said, "It's true." Ning Kei raised his right thumb and praised sincerely, "You have the best intuition. Come, come, come. Please eat some mutton giblets. I have some hidden in the kitchen, just to show my respect to you." Yi Hongyu did not smile. She looked at him and said, "I don't believe it, but it doesn't mean that the divine hall doesn't believe it. My brother appeared in Chang'an to pay attention to Xiahou Gui, but I believe that he actually came to see you. Ning Ke shook his head and said, I have heard some things. Sang Sang also learned some secrets from Wei Guangming. Since the West Hill Divine Palace stopped this matter and imprisoned Wei Guangming for more than 10 years, it means that Haotian Taoism does not believe in the story of the son of Yama. Even if the Divine Hall doesn't believe it, it doesn't mean that the Buddhism sect doesn't believe it. Yi Hongyu said. Ning Ke thought of the two sadhus he met on the streets of Chang and that spring morning. They were Master Daosher from the Shenkong Temple in the unknown place. He thought of the conversation he had with the stone Buddha in front of the lonely grave in the spiritual world, especially the obscure parts of the conversation. He could not help but frown and remain silent. Let's not talk about these boring things. Let's eat mutton giblets first. He looked at Yi Hongyu and smiled. He said, mutton giblets must be eaten while it's hot. Yi Hongyu frowned and said, it's not the winter solstice now, why do we eat mutton giblet soup? Who said that mutton giblets must be eaten on the winter solstice? Who said that you can't stab someone to death without a spearhead? Ning Ke's words seemed a little strange, at least to Yi Hongyu. There was a hidden meaning in it that only he could understand. After a moment of silence, he said, and I may not have time on the winter solstice. Although Yi Hongyu was forced to leave Peach Mountain, as the Grand Master of the Judicial Department, she still had her own sources of information in Chang'an. Therefore, when she heard Ning Ke's words, she could not help but frown deeply again. Her eyes were gradually filled with confusion and surprise. The winter solstice was the day of Xiaoho's glorious return. Time passed and the autumn air gradually faded. A small Taoist temple in Chang'an collapsed. Warm-hearted neighbors helped the people in the temple to rebuild their houses. Then they knew that there was a warm-hearted person in the temple who liked to wear plain clothes. No matter what happened to the neighbors, they would get help from that person. That person seemed to not know what trouble was. A small courtyard at the back of the mountain of the academy had also collapsed. Accompanied by the sound of the waterfall, the man sat in the pool and meditated for many days and nights with an ancient crown on his head. A fat man followed behind the sixth brother and sighed while carrying things such as earth, stones and wood, asking the man to repair the courtyard. Yi Su, the successor of the Jishou Abbey, walked calmly and silently among the passionate and secular people of Chang'an. Mr. Second of the Academy, Jun Mo, stood in front of the lonely and cold waterfall, accepting the baptism of the wet fog. His face became more and more indifferent, but his eyebrows became more and more straight. General Xiaoho, who returned from the frontier fortress, kept receiving rewards from the imperial court. He held banquets in the mansions of various princes and dukes. No one knew that he was still used to sitting in the back garden of his own general's mansion late at night, watching the yellow leaves fall on the bare branches and the falling snowflakes in silence. Ning Ke went back and forth between the back of the mountain of the academy and the Yanming Lake. He cultivated quietly and occasionally fought with Yi Hongyu. Most of the time he was silent in the withering lotus field. Chang'an was very quiet, so it seemed very peaceful. Everyone in the city was silent, so it was peaceful. To most people, this silence and peace would at least last until the end of the winter of the 15th year of the Tianqi era. Because no one could break this peace no matter how they looked at it. The cold wind and snow came suddenly. Autumn had passed and it was the day of the winter solstice. On this day, General Xiaoho returned to the palace to bid farewell. His Majesty the Tang Emperor would once again reward him for his meritorious service and give him the honor of a family banquet. Then all the civil and military officials of the imperial court would send him away from Chang'an. On this day the small Taoist temple was finally rebuilt. Yi Su carefully combed his Taoist bun and stood behind the skinny Taoist, like a tacky receptionist in a village wedding. He thanked the neighbors who came to attend the ceremony, and then moved the chicken, duck and wine in the hands of the neighbors to the back kitchen. On this day, third sister Yu Lian smiled and said to Tang Xiaotang by the low table by the east window of the old library in the back of the mountain of the academy. White mist rose in the iron forging room by the mirror lake, and seventh sister was embroidering in the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Everything was calm as usual, but the shadow of the tall hat that looked like a washing stick could no longer be seen in the green pond under the waterfall. Eldest brother was not in the back of the mountain either, but had gone to Chang'an as a guest. Eldest brother walked up the stone steps and looked at Yi Su with a smile. He said, "Congratulations." Yi Su looked at the renovated Taoist temple behind him and the roofs of the neighbors that he had personally repaired not far away. He showed a sincere smile and said, "Thank you, Mr. First." The people in the house by the Yanming Lake had also woken up. Ning Ke took a bath with the help of Sang Sang and changed into a brand new black academy uniform. He carefully tied up his hair and put on a flat hat. He suddenly looked much more energetic. Sang Sang also took a bath and then cut her hair short with a pair of scissors. She carefully combed a small braid and carefully powdered her hair in front of the bronze mirror. She even drew her eyebrows. Very beautiful. Ning Ke looked at the refreshing little girl in the mirror and said with a smile. Sang Sang stood up from the stool and turned around to tidy up his academy uniform. She took off the thread on his shoulder and said, "Today is our big day. We should be serious." Walking out of the bedroom, Ning Ke snapped his fingers and summoned the big black horse who had been eating wintersweet in the corner of the garden. He gently patted the horse's rump and said, "Go back to the academy by yourself." The big black horse slightly raised its head and felt a little confused. However, it was not a human after all. Even if it had doubts, it could not say it. It could only obey and ran out of the house and along the long street out of the city. Yi Hongyu was not the big black horse. She stood under the tree at the gate of the garden and looked at the master and servant who were wearing new clothes. Suddenly she pointed to the sky above the courtyard and said calmly, "It will snow heavily today. Do you still want to go out?" Dark clouds floated in the dark sky. The clouds were as heavy as mountains and it seemed that it would snow at any time. Ning Ke looked up at the sky and said, "Rain can keep people but snow can't. After holding it in for a day I just couldn't write it. Just when I was about to ask for leave I thank Lin Hai, Ting Tao and Butterfly Blue for their encouragement. I finally succeeded in defeating myself. Thank them and thank you all." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 467. Yi Hongyu said, "You can't keep people in the snow, so you want to keep people here?" Ning Ke said, "I don't understand what you mean." Yi Hongyu asked, "Why did you dismiss all the stewards and maids last night?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "Doesn't this prove that I didn't keep anyone here?" Yi Hongyu said, "You know what I mean." Ning Ke said, "Today is the winter solstice. The stewards and maids should spend more time with their families." Yi Hongyu said, "Then why do you want me to leave? Don't tell me that you haven't given up on assassinating Xiaoho. You're going to do it now." Ning Ke asked, "Are you worried about my life?" Yi Hongyu shook her head. Ning Ke said with a smile, "Although it sounds sad, this is the real you. Since you are not worried about my life, why do you care what I do?" Xiaoho is a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism. My brother came to Chang'an for this. He will not allow you to ruin it and neither will I. So if you want to do it, I will keep you here. Yi Hongyu looked at him and said calmly. Her right hand was about to hold a virtual sword in the winter wind. Ning Ke looked at her right hand and said after a long silence, "It seems that everyone in the world, including my sect, does not agree with me assassinating Xiaoho." He raised his head and looked into Yi Hongyu's eyes quietly. He said, "You know what kind of person I am. I can't defeat Xiaoho, so I won't think about killing him. I want you to leave because I want to tell you that Yisu's Taoist temple is reopening today. Since it's the winter solstice, you should go there." Yi Hongyu said, "You haven't said whether you are going to assassinate Xiaoho." Ning Ke said, "I swear on the headmaster's character that I have never thought about assassinating Xiaoho." Yi Hongyu's expression did not change. She said, "Change your name." Ning Ke said, "If I assassinate Xiaoho, then Sang Sang and I can never be together." Yi Hongyu was startled. She did not expect him to make such a promise. She frowned and asked, "Then why do you two care so much about today?" Ning Ke said, "We are going to the House of Red Sleeves to eat haggis soup." Yi Hongyu was silent. Her green robe fluttered slightly and she disappeared into the depths of the plum tree. The big black horse chewed on the fragrant plum blossoms and left Yanming Lake, running out of the city. The soldiers stationed at the south gate of Chang and city had already been warned by the fish dragon gang and knew the origin of the black horse. They did not stop it and just watched it disappear on the cold winter road outside the city. It didn't take long for the big black horse to run back to the academy. It stepped on the slope from the side door and entered the clouds. It appeared by the mirror lake on the cliff plateau of the back mountain. It kept panting and lowered its head to kiss itself on the surface of the lake. It drank the water greedily to moisten its throat and lungs that were about to burn. The big black horse did not know what Ning Ke was going to do, nor did he know why he felt so uneasy. He just vaguely felt that he should return to the academy earlier so that the people in the academy could guess what was going to happen at Yanming Lake. He thought that he was the messenger. Chin Pippi stood on the other side of the lake and looked at the big black horse on the other side. His round cheeks were filled with deep worry. Tang Xiaotang looked up at him and asked, "Will something happen?" According to younger brother's character, he would not make any decision if he knew that he would lose. So nothing should happen. But why did the big black horse come back? Chin Pippi frowned slightly and said, "Now I realize that I don't seem to understand what he's thinking. I always thought that he was a cold, emotionless and realistic guy, so it's hard for me to imagine that he would do something brave and arrogant." Tang Xiaotang said, "Ning Ke is a very shameless person. But my brother told me before I came to the academy that some people can be extremely shameless. In fact, it actually takes a lot of courage." Chin Pippi said after a moment of silence, "I want to go to Chang'an City." Tang Xiaotang said, "I will go with you." Chin Pippi shook his head and said, "Third sister will not agree. Teacher gave me a break in the morning when I was doing morning lessons." Tang Xiaotang looked at Chin Pippi and said seriously, "Xiahou is the biggest traitor of the Enlightenment doctrine in the past 1,000 years. My brother has always wanted to kill him and so do I. But it is a pity that I do not have the ability to do so. Since youngest uncle wants to kill him today, at least I have to watch from the side." The atmosphere in the palace was very calm. There was the sound of ceremonial music and warm fragrance. The palace maids and eunuchs walked in the hall with smiles on their faces. No one looked at the legendary cruel and cold-blooded General Xiahou, and no one noticed the strange expression on His Majesty's face. His Majesty looked at Xiahou below and said indifferently, "Since the matter has been resolved, don't make any more changes. I don't care about the relationship between Ning Ke and the Xianwei general, and I don't want to know about the recent murder cases in Chang'an City. After all, he is a student of the headmaster of academy. It will be difficult for you to meet him when you leave Chang'an City today. Since it is difficult to meet him, let's not make things difficult for each other." Xiahou left his seat and knelt down, calmly agreeing. His Majesty put his hands behind his back and silently left the side hall, ending the emperor's banquet for returning officials in advance. All the eunuchs and palace maids in the hall also left with him, leaving the side hall to the empress and General Xiahou, who had been quietly waiting by the side. According to the rules, it was very inappropriate for the empress to be alone with a general of the empire. However, this was His Majesty's order and no one dared to object. The empress quietly looked at her brother below and sighed softly. She said, "Will he be all right?" Xiahou looked at her, and on his usual dark and indifferent face, there was a very rare warm and pampering smile. He said, "We are going back to our hometown. Nothing will happen. I feel relaxed like never before. Sister, you will be alone in Chang'an City from now on. You must be careful. If anything goes wrong, inform me as soon as possible." The empress smiled and said, "Judging from the movements in the academy, it should be peaceful. This was originally the agreement between Mr. First and me. I think the headmaster of the academy also has the same attitude. As for Ning Ke, we all know what kind of person he is. Of course it will be peaceful." Xiahou frowned slightly and forcibly suppressed the increasingly irritating cough in his chest. He did not want to let his sister worry about him after leaving Chang'an. The empress silently looked at his face. Her gentle gaze seemed to be able to penetrate deep into his body. She looked at the injury in his lungs and faintly said, "In the wilderness, Tang caused you such a serious injury. I think he must not have had a good time. Why didn't you take the opportunity to kill him at that time?" Xiahou coughed softly and said, "He can hurt me and I can hurt him. It is all natural. However, if I want to kill him, I need to sacrifice more lives. Those cavalries in the wilderness are all loyal subordinates who have followed me for many years. Why should I let them exchange their lives?" Hearing this, the empress's expression became more and more gentle. She comforted him and said, "Brother, you have changed a lot. Not as cold, violent, and murderous as before?" Xiahou laughed at himself. He thought that when he and his sister left the wilderness and came to the Tang Empire, they did not have any background. His Majesty had not yet ascended the throne, and she was not the empress. What else could they do if they wanted to gain a foothold in such a big empire but to make all their enemies feel terrified? It was winter. Snow fell from the sky like powder, coating the red walls of the palace with a thin layer of powder. The square in front of the side hall was covered with snow, as if it would not stop. Xiahou silently looked at the cold snow outside the hall. He could not help but think of the snow-like ashes on his hands after he snatched the iron box from Ning Ke in the north of the Hulun Sea. Then he seemed to hear some whimpering sounds in the deepest part of the wind and snow. It was not the whistling of the north wind, but the chirping of cicadas. He knew it was an auditory hallucination, but his face still became a little ugly. Decades ago he left Tianqi Mountain and went south to the Tang Empire. He was full of pride and arrogance. However, when he decided to betray the Enlightenment doctrine and cook Murong Linshuang to death, his pride and anger had long disappeared. For so many years he had only covered it with violence and cruelty. Because from that day on he was a traitor of the devil's doctrine. From that day on, there had been two extremely cold dark clouds in the depths of his heart that could not be driven away. One of the dark clouds was his teacher, Master Lotus. The other was the current suzerain of the devil's doctrine, 23-year cicada cultivation. Xiahou was very powerful and confident, but he was very clear that once the two dark clouds floated over, he would have no way out except death. When Kuharan destroyed the front gate of the devil's doctrine with a single sword, he did not see Master Lotus die with his own eyes. He could not believe that a person like his teacher would die so quietly. The current suzerain of the devil's doctrine cultivated 23-year cicada cultivation and hid in the world. He was known as the most mysterious person in the cultivation world. Although it was said that he had died long ago, Xiahou did not dare to believe it. Therefore he had been living in fear all these years. In the north of the Hulan Sea, Xiahou snatched the iron box from Ning Kei's hands. In the box was not the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane, but the ashes of his teacher, Lotus. He was a little disappointed, then sad and then relieved. It was probably at that moment that he really had the idea to retire and stop caring about the world. I don't know what adventure Ning Kei had after entering the front gate. Xiahou looked at the dancing snowflakes outside the hall and said with a complicated expression, "Since the ashes of my teacher appeared in his hands, he might have inherited something. And suzerain, I don't know where he is hiding now. Although he certainly does not dare to stay in Chang'an, there is nowhere in the world that he cannot go." The Empress was very clear about what her brother's biggest fear was. She walked to his side and softly comforted him, but Master Lotus is dead after all. The 23-year cicada cultivation that the suzerain cultivated is the world's most perverted and dangerous cultivation method. All these years, neither the Haotian Taoism nor the Academy could find any trace of him. I'm afraid that he is already dead. If he is still alive, why did he not come to you for so many years? I hope so. Xiahou said, Yi Su of the Haotian Taoism came to Chang'an, and the people of the Buddhism sect will also come. Now that I think about it, among the three sects in the world, only the devil's doctrine has withered like this. I can't help but feel a little sad. There are more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.